Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Panel on Monday, the 20th of January 2025. My name is Councillor Chris Moriarty and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that the participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. Firstly, it'd be useful if all panel members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public are aware of who is in this meeting and the role they are undertaking. So I've already introduced myself as chair, so I will go to our vice chair to introduce herself and then we'll work around the room.
Councillor Helen Price, I'm the Vice Chair of this scrutiny panel.
Hello, I'm Councillor Neil Knowles and I'm substituting for Councillor David Buckley this evening.
Maureen Hunt, member of the panel.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Julian Sharp, voting member of the panel.
Hello, Councillor Julian Teasy, member of the panel. Hello, Councillor George Shaw, member of the panel.
Councillor Gurch Singh, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Mark Howard, member of the panel.
Mark Bealey, Principal Democratic Services Officer for Overview and Scrutiny.
Kevin McDaniel, Executive Director for Adult Services, Health and Communities.
Stephen Evans, Chief Executive.
Ian O'Donnell, Interim Executive Director of Resources.
Julian McGowan, Assistant Director of Finance.
And Nikki Craig, Assistant Director, HR Corporate Projects and IT.
Thank you very much. So I request that the meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking, if appropriate. I'll also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I'm able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. And I would also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a panel, I would ask you please to limit the repetition of points or questions which have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. We'll manage that as we go through. And we will now start on the agenda item. So do we have, Mark, any apologies for absence?
I've just got one apology tonight, Chair, from Councillor Buckley and with Councillor Knowles attending as substitute.
Thank you very much. Any other apologies whilst we're at it? Don't think so. Any declarations of interest? No, we're good. Okay, so minutes of the last meeting. Anyone have anything to raise against the minutes of the last meeting? Councillor Price.
11. At the time of the last meeting, there was a figure of £16 million that we had found discrepancies, and I asked and said, is it likely that this could go up by any more? And when are we going to get to the end of investigating all of these discrepancies? And I was told hopefully by the end of the year. And the impression I left the meeting with distinctly was actually we're just about there, the 16 million. Within a few days, we were told it had gone up to 25 million, which I understand because we put a lot of queries with the auditors to ask them should items be capitalised or revenue, which is fine, there's always a grey area. And then there was a whole host of other things later, which I don't think we knew about at the time. But we did know that those items had gone to the auditors, but there was no indication to all I think I would have liked to have known was, well, there is a considerable sum with the auditors and we're not quite sure what ruling they're going to have, so it could go up by a large amount. Not even to know necessarily the amount, but to know that was happening, but I didn't know it was happening. And so I felt I was not in a position, therefore, to provide full role of scrutiny, but if I had had that information, and there may have been a reason why we weren't told that, but I'd just like to raise that. Thank you.
Fine. So if I'm hearing that correctly, it's it's not necessarily a discrepancy with what was captured as part of the minutes, because that's what happened.
That's what happened.
But your concern is as a sort of raising a point that we would have expected to hear,
Yes.
given the proximity of it. So
Yes.
we can make a note of that and sort of take it as a bit of a learning move for you, if you're happy with that approach to it, yeah?
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else in terms of minutes from the previous meeting? Good. Okay, so we'll take that as a fair reflection of the minutes. Okay, so that brings us on to today's only substantive item. So this, just for those who might not be aware, that might be listening or watching this after the meeting, is that this is the rescheduled meeting from last month where we were due to look at the budget. But because of where the budget process was and Cabinet's opportunity to look at it before it came to us, things were moved along. Now, it does condense the timeline after this meeting towards the council conclusion. However, and I'm sure you did this all over the Christmas period, it did give you a bit longer to look at the budget prior to the meeting. So that was, the documents were, I think it was the 18th, the December meeting, Cabinet meeting on the 18th of December that these were published. So a little bit about tonight from my point of view, and how I hope the discussion's going to move forward before I hand over to either Stephen or Ian to sort of introduce the paper. So as you know, we've asked the councillors to send questions in advance, and that's because of the anticipated scale of questions we were going to get, the technicality of those questions, and that was to give officers an opportunity to do some work in advance. Now, those answers, officers' answers, were published today. So those are now all in the public domain. The questions that were asked, the responses to them. Now, I know that doesn't give anyone a load of time to have a look at them, but to make it clear, but so that we don't repeat things, the idea is not to work through those questions line by line in this meeting. The whole point of sending them in advance was to kind of make this meeting as efficient as possible. However, if you've had a chance to look at them, you're not either happy with the response, need something else clarifying, or have a follow-up question, then of course we'll dive into that. But just to set the expectation here, we're not going to work through those questions and repeat the answers in the meeting that have already been published. I know, disappointing. So that's the idea today, that we're going to go through those by exception, and then any new fresh questions. Worth bearing in mind as well that there are also other papers that have gone alongside this budget. So we have a summary of a session that the Place Scrutiny panel had with the relevant officers. We have a similar process for adults, children's and health, for going through theirs, and we've had those made available to us. They're kind of overviews of what they were looking into. Again, we're not going to go through those in detail tonight. They're there for councillors, panel members to review and to raise anything from them that might need further clarification. We also have two elements from the residents, two sort of public generated documents as well. So we've had some questions from social media. So there was a couple of social posts that went out inviting residents to submit questions. Now, they haven't come through formally. We haven't sort of had formal submissions. We haven't got any public speakers tonight. I've got a copy of those questions. Because they're less formal in how they're submitted, I don't plan to read them out verbatim and ask those questions, but I will do my level best to bring forward some of the themes and make sure we cover them off as best we can in the discussion. And the other document is we have a sort of a general overview of what the current themes are coming from the consultation. Again, the plan is not tonight to go through the consultation in great depth, but it was there to give councillors a bit of another dimension to the conversation as well. So if anyone's got any questions about that, feel free to bring them up. But just to set expectations, we don't plan to sit and listen to someone talk through that document. Now, in terms of process, I'm hoping that we'll be able to finish this meeting by 10 o'clock at the very latest. And I know that in previous sessions, that's been a challenge, particularly on the budget meeting. But part of the reason for doing so much pre-work was to try and make that as efficient as possible. And my plan is to go through, because I know that it said in the intro, kind of raise all your questions. I'm actually going to try and take us through in a sensible structure. So we will look at the budget in sections. So we will first, I'm going to ask panelists to bring forward anything around the approach to the budget, the financial assumptions, the financial approach as a whole. So the general assumptions, the general process. We will then dive into each of the separate areas. So we'll start with, and this is in no particular order, but look at any of the implications of the budget to place. So any place questions that you have, anything around adult services, and then on to children's and health, I guess will be part of the same. Is that like a sensible? Oh, you're adults, aren't you? So yeah, so we'll try and cover children's and health. I guess we'll come at it as we do as we go through the discussion. But that's the idea. So if you've got questions about other parts of the budget, park them until that section, and we'll get you back into the conversation. And then just as a reminder of what happens afterwards, we've got tonight to put, to develop some of the thinking around what our view is on this budget. We do have another corporate ONS panel on the 5th of February. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have an item that deep dives into the budget again, but it does give us an opportunity if there's any loose ends or any questions that we need to follow up on. We do have another opportunity to talk through them before it goes back to Cabinet in February and finally comes to Council in March for the Council meeting on budget. So just for people to understand where we are in the process. And my final point, and I will hand over at this point, is a reminder about the role of this panel, and therefore thinking about how we ask questions and why we ask questions, is that tonight is about understanding and teasing out things like technical implications of the budget approach, assumptions, conclusions, and testing those. What isn't for this room, I believe, is anything around decision-making process, policy decisions. That sits elsewhere. Now, that might be that we understand technical implications tonight that might shape whether or not we think a policy is right or wrong, but that's not to be discussed in this panel. That goes to Cabinet, and that's what the full Council meeting is about as well, in terms of these wider kind of policy decisions. The opportunity tonight is to work through the detail with officers to help us make informed contributions to these other debates. And it's worth saying that these are draft proposals, okay? So a lot of this stuff is about, draft proposals, draft policies, and we are here to pass our concerns about those to Cabinet, okay? So tonight's your opportunity to talk to officers about understanding this in more detail to help inform those discussions. Deep breath, pause, okay? Sorry, that's quite a monologue, but hopefully my concern is with something like the budget is that it could become a really big, unwieldy conversation, and it's quite important we keep it tight. So any questions on process, Councillor Price?
Just to make clear, at the end of this process, we will have maybe concerns or recommendations or saying, yeah, that bit's okay, which go to Cabinet, and then Cabinet will look at what we have said and decide either, yeah, that's a good point, or no, it's not, because that's what we're getting at the end of this process.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Mark, in terms of process?
No, that's absolutely perfect what Councillor Price just said. So yeah, Cabinet will be able to review the recommendations, the minutes of discussion we have tonight. They can then take forward any parts that they agree with. If they don't, then that's fine. They'll decide at Cabinet. But yeah, that will then be the full budget that goes, the full and final budget, which then goes to full Council for adoption and approval in March.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions or clarifying points about the process or the kind of aim of tonight and how we're going to approach it? No? Lovely. Okay, so Ian, over to you to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. And since this is my first meeting that I'm attending in my official capacity, I hope you forgive me if I just take a moment to introduce myself to members. My name is Ian O'Donnell. I am a local authority resources director and have been doing that role now for many years. in several different local authorities, but I spent 10 years as the resources director in Ealing Council. That was my longest tenure. Since I retired from that role in 2018, I have been working with councils that are in financial difficulty. So I've been working at places like Croydon, Liverpool, Birmingham, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and Newham. And so in coming to the challenge that you are facing as an organisation, I'm able to bring the experience that I've had in those organisations. And I've already started work on talking to the government about the position and working on the budget report. But I am on week 3. So let me introduce this report. The very serious and significant challenge that you have as an organisation does mean that you will need exceptional financial support from the government in order to set a budget. You have a situation in the current year where you are in a position of negative reserves. So you're quite deep underwater to the tune of about 42 million. And next year, you will be unable to balance your budget without exceptional financial support. The report explains that you have had historically very low levels of council tax income and low levels of council tax increases. And that's been a major factor in limiting the amount of income that you have available as an organisation. There is a significant level of debt that is borrowing by the council. So the net revenue budget in 2025-26 is 127.4 million. The debt is over 230 million, and the cost of servicing that debt is 18.6 million. So it's about 15% of the council spend to service that debt. You discovered some errors in the accounts going back to 2021, principally concerned with the capitalisation of revenue expenditure, which was incorrect, and that's estimated at somewhere around 30 million. You have pressures in adults, in children's, in temporary accommodation, all of which are contributing to the gap in 2024-25 and will need to be addressed in the budget for 2025-26. In the report, a number of assumptions have been made about next year, which I'll draw to your attention. Pay inflation is incorporated in the budget at 3%, and general inflation is assumed at 2%. The overall social care inflation is at 6% for next year and 4% thereafter. Temporary accommodation is at 6% and 2% thereafter. In this version of the report, and this will change in the final version, we've made an assumption that the employer's national insurance increases are funded for direct employees only, but the government's distribution mechanism for the funding for that is a bit more complicated than that, and we will deal with that in the final report. The social care transformation review is intended to achieve 10% savings in the social care budgets, and those will start to be realised in 25-26, but they're mainly in 26-27. The report also includes growth and savings, which are set out in the appendices. There is a section on reserves, but again, that will change when we get to the final budget report, because I have to make a report to the members of the council about the level of reserves and the robustness of the estimates in the budget. So the wording around that is being drafted at the moment. So in relation to the exceptional support, we are in dialogue with the government, and we have been since May last year. We have submitted to the government our ask and that is currently in a process at MHCLG and is being considered. We're not alone in this. There are, we know, over 30 new requests for exceptional financial support in with the government from other councils, and the indications are that there are more in the pipeline. So in terms of the timing for when we will find out what the government's decision is about that exceptional financial support, I'll just put that into context for you with our budget timetable. So our budget consultation with the public ends on the 30th of January. And in mid-February, we are expecting a decision from the government concerning our council tax cap request. So we've asked, can we set the council tax higher than the cap? That will be announced as part of the final settlement, and the information that we know about the final settlement date is that it will be January or early February 2025, which could mean that it's as late as mid-February. On 18th of February, we'll be issuing the papers for Cabinet. So we won't have had at that point the decision about the capitalisation aspect of our exceptional financial support request. We don't know the date on which the government will announce that, but to give you an indication, last year they announced the exceptional financial support capitalisation decisions on the 26th of February. That was quite late, and that's certainly later than would be helpful for us in terms of the Cabinet papers. So there is a possibility that there will be an addendum to the papers for Cabinet in relation to that if the decision is later than we would like. Budget Council is on the 5th of March. So again, potentially subject to the MHCLG decision timing, we may have to move it. But there is a serious implication if we do, which is that we have a slot booked for the printing of our council tax bills on the 10th of March with CAPTA. And if we miss that, then we'll go to the back of the queue and our bills will be printed much later, which is not a good thing because of the implications that that has for our instalment date for council tax and our cash flow. So that's the timetable and the possible implications of a late decision from the government. So I will finish there and go back to the chair and we can move on to the next section. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ian. And I realised you were struggling with, we've tried to turn the volume up a little bit for you, so hopefully you can hear a bit at the back as well. So look, we've had the kind of overview there. It's a good kind of starting point to then get into the budgeting process and any questions around it. The last thing from me before we go into that, I went through the sections that we'll talk about. Of course, I missed one on revenue, so we'll have to look at that as well. That was one of the sections we'll look at, but I think we'll get to that after we've gone through some of the costs. It kind of makes sense to look at the revenue after you've looked at some of the costs as well. Okay, so I open it to panel. Anything that anyone would like to ask on the budgeting process, financial assumptions, and anything related to that? Councillor Howard.
Thank you for those sobering words. Got two questions, and it's about the sensitivity and the assumptions based on inflation and interest on loans. Well, I had a look on National Stats website yesterday. First of all, there didn't seem to be any measures of inflation which were as low as 2%. I understand that you're saying that more specific budget items are being put in at 6%. So it brings back the question, how robust are our inflation figures compared to reality? Are we being optimistic, pessimistic, or where, please? Sorry.
Well, I wasn't here when the original report was drafted, but I believe that at the time, there was a reference to the OBR figure. However, as we all know, that changes over time. And the key thing is, how much capacity do we have as an organisation to manage those kind of swings in the assumptions that we make? So we will make some assumptions. Some of them will be wrong, inevitably. We haven't got a crystal ball. But we do have to have the capacity to be able to manage those kind of shocks. So that is where the question of contingency and reserves comes into play. So there is some contingency within the budget. It's a relatively low amount. So the main pressure would have to be managed through reserves. Hence my saying earlier that I have to do a report to council on whether I think the reserves are robust enough in order to allow us to manage these issues. So I will take into consideration in that report the assumptions that we've made, how robust I think that they are, and I will report on them to council then.
Councillor Howard, just before you jump back in, I think we're struggling to hear at the back, aren't we? So could we pull that microphone a little bit closer and just maybe lean in a little bit? We've pumped the speakers up as much as we can. So there we go. So, okay. So there we go. So just so everyone can hear it. So hopefully that'll fix that. Thank you. So Councillor Howard, did you want to follow up on that?
Robustness of reserves to counter any the robustness of any reserves to counter any error is understandable. It's more the case of, you've mentioned that two of the greatest assumptions we have is that the biggest thing that we pay out for, which is out of our control, is interest payments on debt. And it's 15 million or 15, sorry, I think it was 15 million a year. A 1% increase in interest rates or decrease presumably saves us or costs us a couple of million quid, which is roughly the amount of our reserves at the moment. My point is that if we have got to go to the government, if we have got to raise council tax, if we've got to do all these difficult things, we need to be able to be doing it in a way that is reasonable and not just hopefully optimistic. And my slight chip on my shoulder makes me feel that some of the assumptions are a little optimistic, bearing in mind what we've seen over the last 6 months.
So on the subject of our long-term debt, we are locked into fixed rates on long-term debt. We do have some exposure to shorter term rates, and that means that we are vulnerable in that context to fluctuations in interest rates. We've been talking to our Treasury Management advisors about this in the last week or so, and I'm minded to move about half of the amount that we have in short-term debt into longer-term debt, fixed rates that hedges against that eventuality. So that's specifically on that point. On the question of our forecasts, we're reviewing the forecast as part of writing the final budget report. You're quite right. It's absolutely important that we do the best job that we possibly can in getting those right. But as I said before, I can assure you that some of them will turn out to be wrong simply because it's impossible to predict.
And can I just check that, can you guys hear better now that we've made that adjustment? Because we can, and Councillor Knowles, can you hear okay?
Oh, yes, I'm directly.
Right, I'm inside your ear, that's good. But we have got some more units if you want that.
Grab some for them so they can hear.
Would that help if you had those as well? Yeah. But it's important you hear everyone as well. So. It's your smooth voice, Ian, that causing us issues here. So just bear with us just while we do that, because it's important that everyone can hear tonight. Mark's just going to fix that for us. So, Councillor Sharp, can you hear me in your headphones okay? Oh, that's a big thumbs up. Lovely. And Councillor Hunt, can you hear me okay there? Perfect, lovely. Okay, so Councillor Howard, we're all good with that. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Price.
I'd like to start off with two positives. We didn't think that would happen tonight, did we? So one is, it's good to see that the council plan has not been ignored in the creation of this budget. So I'm really pleased to see that hasn't been thrown out. The other is the addressing the insufficient officer corps in terms of capacity and capability in order to do the job properly. So I'm pleased to see that that's been built in. I have questions which have looked at the buffer that we have, which is 2% of expenses. And that strikes me as incredibly low, considering all the risks that we are facing. And it was one of the questions I asked in writing, but there wasn't an answer at that time. And if there's an answer now, that would be lovely. But if not, that for me is a very serious risk that it isn't sufficient in terms of all the risks that we're facing locally, nationally and internationally. And then there was a question, because there was a reference in 5.9 to the flexible use of capital receipts, which we thought was coming to an end. And it's saying, actually, it's not coming to an end. And this may be something that we can use, but at the time of writing this report, didn't know how it could be used or weren't sure how it'll be used. And I wonder if there's any more clarification on that. So that's my general overview questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Ian, you've touched on a little bit on the contingency element with Councillor Howard's Price. So if there's any more to elaborate on that, that'd be great. And then just a question on there about capital receipts, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the things to take into consideration when deciding how much you need in contingency is the grip that you have on managing the budget that you've set. And one of the lessons from the current year is that we have struggled to grip the delivery of savings and keep within our budgets in some of our key areas like adults and children's and temporary accommodation. So one of the big focuses for me has been trying to understand whether we're actually taking the right action to address that in setting the budget for next year. At the moment, within adults and children's, we have a firm called Newton who are looking at the budgets and the expenditure within those areas with a view to identifying opportunities for us to reduce our costs and to better grip the way in which we're delivering those services and keep them within budget. So that's quite a significant step forward for us. That work is advancing quite quickly. In addition to that, we are looking at the way in which we are tackling the delivery of savings during the course of the year. So one of the reasons for adults overspend in the current year is non-delivery of some of the savings that were built into the budget. We are planning to change that process by introducing program management discipline to the delivery of the savings. So rather than simply monitoring it through the budget monitor and identifying what the forecast is, we're actually going to be looking at the actions that needed to be taken in order to deliver those savings, and we'll be reporting on those on a monthly basis through the transformation program. So that will improve the amount of grip and the amount of early warning we have when things are not going right with savings. So, and I would agree that in any organisation where there is evidence that these things have in the past not been gripped well, there is a need for a contingency. I think 2% is the sort of level that you might expect to see in an organisation where these things are being delivered on target. So were it not for the fact that we've put these other measures in place, I would be saying I think we need to increase the contingency level. But since we have, I'm satisfied that that 2% contingency is adequate. But that also factors into the calculations that I'll be making about the reserves, because that is the other way in which we can manage the sort of shocks that we've seen over the last year.
Okay, Councillor Price, any, oh, and yeah.
Flexible use of capital receipts, which is the second question. So we are currently doing an exercise looking at where we might be able to use capital receipts in that flexible way to deliver transformation within the organisation. The principal thing that we are looking for is further savings that can be delivered through transformation. So a set of proposals will be put forward as part of the budget proposals in the budget report. We don't have them, I'm afraid, at this point, so we can't share them with you.
Thank you very much. Any more on that? Councillor Howard.
I think just to clarify, when you're talking about using capital receipts in this, it's making sure that the investment in these cost-saving ideas is actually allowed under the spending of capital under public sector finance rules, rather than it, as previously might have been done, guessing that it's under the rules. Is that correct, just to clarify?
Absolutely correct. We will be looking at that rigorously.
Okay, anything else on budget approach, assumptions, financial approach? Councillor Teasey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'll just start by an observation, and then I've got a couple of questions about the approach and the assumptions. The observation, it's really good to have you here, by the way, Ian, so welcome. Quite an impressive CV, and it's really good that you have specific expertise in councils in a difficult financial position as we are. And it's interesting in the introduction how what you said is remarkably very, very similar to what we've heard many, many times before in this chamber, in various committees, both this committee, in terms of why we're here, and in terms of the historic low council tax levels, the debt, the historic errors, and the fact that we're paying an enormous amount of money to service our debt, and on demand-led statutory costs. It is very sad that there are some who still, it's understandable that when we look at the initial responses to the consultation, there are some who don't want it to be like this. In fact, I don't want it to be like this. I don't think any of us are happy to be in the situation, but it is disappointing where there are some who are still saying that somehow this is all just nonsense, that that none of this is required. It really is quite sad. Can I just ask a couple of questions though? One is about the reserves brought forward. So on the main pack, I think the 92-page pack, sorry, if I can get a page number, there are a couple of tables, one based on the 4.99%, and then the next one on assuming the 24.99%. And at the bottom of that table, it has it's Appendix A. Appendix A, yes, okay. So Appendix A, there's a sort of a little sort of a table in tabular format and in graph format. There's the, as it were, the flight path, and it just shows that at 4.99%, the general fund goes down, 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 and at 24.99%, it starts to creep up. My question is the opening balance, which shows that there's about 10 million. Now, I think 10 million was the historic number that we had, but events have taken over. And of course, we've had accounts have since been signed off. And this is, for example, it was in the review by the auditors that we found all of these, we found all of these historic errors. Is that 10 million opening position still what we think it actually is? Because if it's, if it's lower than that, then that has an implication. Do we have a best estimate of? I know that it's. I know that it's. Sorry, I know. Obviously, wearing my audit and governance hat, that we're still not quite there at the opening position because we have one more set of accounts to do, which is still in flight. But do we have a best estimate of what our actual opening position is, and if it's anywhere near the 10 million? So I'll just leave it there.
So obviously this report was written before we'd actually closed the 23-24 accounts. Obviously it's different now. We published our accounts in early January, so we know our opening reserve for 24-25, which was in effect a negative £30 million reserve. And then obviously we've got to take into account the outturn for the current year when we cap. So I guess what I'm saying is in the next report, this will be presented quite differently because we won't be estimating our opening reserve. We'll know what it was. So at the point this report was written, that 10.2 was the last definitive audited, well, not audited, but confirmed position of our general fund. Does that make sense?
It does, but can I just clarify what you just said there, and the implication for this? Obviously, there's a timing, and we're in an unfortunate position that we're having to complete sets of accounts that were historic and that we that we haven't had the, as it were, the comfort of the audit that you would normally expect in the normal course of events. We know that we're not alone in this, but on the other hand, when we started with 3 years out of date, I think we're now, we're now 1 year out of date, and this 1 year hopefully will be, well, we're looking this again, hopefully sometime in February, but that's obviously, you know, it will happen when it happens. But are you saying that actually our starting position is, if it is so much worse than 10 million, then is this still credible in terms of our flight path, or do we need to change something?
We will obviously update figures, but what I should say is the general fund brought forward in that table includes an estimate. So that included an estimate of what would happen in the 23-24 account. So that 43 million general fund brought forward, you see that table includes the 30 million historical issues and the outturn. So in effect, I think this table broadly stands. We're going to have to revisit the figures now in the light of both the absolute final figures and the current year's performance. But no, I think that the table still stands in terms of it had taken into account the issues which we knew were coming in the 23-24.
All right. But one further question just on approach, and it's, I suppose, a more sort of general take a step back question, and it'd be interesting to get your view in, because being new, almost coming in 3 weeks, it's probably a slightly unfair question, but first impressions sometimes can be useful. I mean, well, we've arguably done one good thing in making sure that we have the right expertise, but it's the question is, in terms of our approach, it seems that there is more scrutiny than there might have been, but that's going from a low base where there wasn't enough scrutiny. We know that accounts are being finished that had not been done previously. But I'd be interested in your assumption in terms of the way we're going about this, particularly the cost saving initiatives that we put in place. Before we go into the specifics, because we'll get there in a second, but in terms of the general approach, what would your overall impression be in terms of, is there more that can be done? And if there is more that can be done, what is there anything we're missing in terms of our general approach?
One of the first things that I did was have a look at the benchmarking that relates to adult social care and children's social care, and how the council stacks up in terms of value for money compared to other organisations. And it was immediately apparent to me that this organisation has actually driven a great deal of efficiency in the way that it delivers those services. And indeed, in some parts of the organisation, and particularly the corporate centre, I think it may have gone too far and taken more capacity out of the corporate centre than perhaps it should have done to allow the organisation to function properly. So, by most measures, you can see that the savings that could have been taken out of this organisation have been taken, and there are other organisations out there of a similar type that haven't done that and are still working away at delivering those savings. But when I ask the questions, the answer that I get is, "Oh, we've already done that," and I think that is because of the pressure that's come from having to manage with a low council tax income, and that has caused you as an organisation to get to these savings opportunities earlier than others. So my general answer is, I think that you have fewer opportunities than other organisations do, because you've already taken them. And you are already doing the things that I would expect to see. So, for example, the engagement of Newton and the work that they're doing in adult social care and children's. If this organisation was in a government intervention, that is exactly what they would do. They would put an organisation like that in to find the things. You're already doing it. So I don't think there is a great deal of scope to find lots more efficiencies. I think you are at the point where you're starting to think about, will any further savings might impede our ability to be able to deliver our statutory responsibilities.
Just one final point on that. It's in a way I'm sort of, I'm torn on that because in a way that there's good news and there's bad news there. The good news is, again, we're being told that we're doing all we can. The bad news is that we're doing all we can. And it's bad news because I would almost love it. I'd love it if there were things that, oh, but you missed this. Oh, brilliant, we'll do that. So it's good from a scrutiny point of view, but sad from a, an overall point of view.
Yeah, I used to work for an organisation that was doing an exercise like this, and they once said, you trim the fat and you end up hitting bone. There's only so far you can go. Stephen, do you want to add a point to that?
Just that, I mean, I've spoken in these meetings before about capacity, and that is without a doubt an issue for the council, but also in terms of savings, we are achieving savings, but as mentioned earlier, they, like a lot of, well, pretty much every council, there's a proportion of those savings which from the outset are very challenging and risky. And part of the issue we've got this year is that some of those savings aren't being achieved. But I think, based on what Ian's saying, we are starting from a very, very difficult position that the kind of easy savings, if you like, have already been taken. So we are down to the challenging bits, and we will clearly be transparent about what Newton are saying about what's achievable. But I think they are coming to the same conclusion that clearly there is further work we can do in some of those areas, perhaps where we can go a bit faster. But actually, we are starting from a challenging base because of the efficiency that's been driven out effectively to deal with the money that's been taken out of the budget over a period of time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Knowles.
We spoke briefly the other day online. I'm gratified that you are looking at the ways of managing the debt. As one of the things we can control. Demand-led services, we're the victim of everybody. So I'm glad there's a bit of a widening thing. I do appreciate that the government has asked for a 1-year cutting plan, which is what we're providing in advance of hopeful reform of the funding system and things changing very quickly. So I'm acutely aware of that. But I'm equally aware that anyway, regardless of whatever, that re-examining that debt and how that's scheduled, even though it's not easy, I know it's not as straightforward, is really gratifying. I think I share the concerns of a lot of people. We've sat through years of budgets with big long lists of savings. And like huge lists, you've probably seen some of them in the past. And I've certainly felt that the council officers and heads of service have been under immense pressure to come up with numbers to get under the door. So you are monitoring this, and have you had a chance to review? It's a much smaller list this time, that these are actually viable and deliverable now, as opposed to the pressure just to make the numbers match, which has happened in the past, which I've always felt the pain that officers feel trying to make it fit. So do you think that's a much more robust set of savings there?
Well, I'm aware that as a council, you've been through a budget setting process, which does put these under quite considerable scrutiny to assess whether they are robust and deliverable. And that has brought us to a point where we have a list. Having looked at them, I've not drilled into each one in detail yet, but having looked at them, I can say that the things that I see there do look as if they're realistic and deliverable. But obviously I need to do a much more detailed review before I can sign off the budget and say that it's robust and deliverable. So that's a piece of work for me to conclude before we publish the papers. We will be taking additional action, as I mentioned earlier, this year of ensuring that there is a detailed plan for the implementation of these savings, and we will track that through the transformation programme. So, I'll have a much earlier indication if anything is going wrong, and we'll be able to take action to deal with it. But yes, I have to sign these off as robust and deliverable as part of my Section 25 statement, so I'll be looking at it in detail.
I think as well, just to add to that, I'm just checking with Mark there. I think we look in this panel at the transformation programme and how it's tracking, sort of on a RAG system as well. So I guess that's another opportunity for us to track that in light of the budget savings. So thanks for bringing that up, Councillor Knowles. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, welcome to the borough. Yeah, you've got the experience for this role. I mean, these local authorities that you're running, they're similar, if not worse, financial situation than us. So yeah, welcome. Just wanted to just ask a few more questions about these. I do have some concern about the savings and the grip that we have on delivering these savings. I just wanted to know a little bit more about that, and because you're talking about resource issue as well. And is that an issue? Because I know some of the savings weren't delivered because of pressures on services, the demand-led services. But was there other contractual reasons for them savings not being delivered, or was it the reason that the savings may not have been realistic in the first place when they were originally agreed? They're a bit optimistic. That's the first question. I know you wasn't here at the time, so it wasn't, none of you guys were. But Steve, I don't.
I suggest that Kevin McDaniel comes in on this one, since he's been working on the adults savings issues.
Mm-hmm. Because I want to ensure that savings are the ones that are in budget now. Obviously, they are deliverable. So I want to see that story there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Singh, for your question. But as Ian said, in the process, we've looked through the budget. Sorry, as Ian said, as Stephen said, we've been looking for budget savings that have been harder and harder to come through. In the adult social care world, we compared where we were in terms of delivering services by looking at benchmarking, and we're optimistic that we could help our residents stay more independent for longer at home. And we set some ambitious targets to return the number of people receiving services to where they were at pre-pandemic levels. We haven't been able to do that, despite doing a good job for residents, helping more not go into residential accommodation, just keeping up with the demand as per the national trend. We've not been able to get back. So the right challenge is, were we over optimistic with those? Yes, probably. And therefore, what can we do better to set out a regular programme of review in order that we can see that we're on track, rather than assuming that good things will happen if we work hard.
Thank you. So, sorry, if I just come back on. Yeah, that's okay. Where else was I? Yeah, this the council tax increase, obviously 25%. That's obviously been highlighted around in the reports, and obviously there's concern with residents with that level of increase of council tax. And you said we've been in conversation with government MHCLG since May 2023. I know some councils have been looking at and requesting that their debt gets wiped off. And I just wanted to ask, in these conversations, is there any realistic possibility, or has that been discussed? Because obviously we've had issues with the accounts. Accounts haven't been signed off, and I just wanted to see if there is any buffer there in terms of that increase, and or is that all going to be left to government until May? Will that be addressed in their letter when they issue it towards the end of this month?
There are some councils that have such exceptionally high amounts of borrowing that they will never be able to repay it. And I believe that the government is looking at, although I don't think they've committed to, the prospect of writing that debt off. Now that's a hit to the national purse, so you can appreciate that the government is not happy about that. It looks on it as a local issue. So it's not looking at writing debt off as part of an exceptional support package for councils that are in our situation. So I think there's no possibility that they would contemplate that. And although the level of debt that we're carrying is relatively high, it's not exceptionally high. There are plenty of other councils out there with a similar level of debt, and there is no prospect that the government will consider writing any of that off. I think the simple fact is that even if we did benefit from that, it would still not be enough to put us in a position where we could balance the budget every year. So, we are going to have to put the council tax up if we're going to be able to have a sustainable budget for the future. Having looked at the comparative council tax levels between us and other councils in Berkshire and nationally, it is quite clear that we are very low compared to others. And when you look at it in the context of local government reorganisation, which is clearly a major policy of this government, some equalisation of those council tax levels is going to be necessary in the run up to merging councils and reorganising. So it strikes me that it is the obvious solution for our issues, but clearly I don't have the government's own perspective on this. I can only see it from our point of view, and I wouldn't be able to speculate about what their view about it is.
Finances as well. I did ask the previous Director of Resources about the finances, whether we've looked at the refinances of the big bulk of funding. At that time, we hadn't looked at it, and I know what you're saying. We're fixed for a significant period of time with the bulk of the money. I just wanted to ask about the short-term lending that we've got. Do you have any idea on that? The amount of money we're talking and the rates, and what sort of assumption we've got on the savings if we refinance that to a new figure? Have you looked at that at all?
Yes. So our short-term borrowing is about 43 million, and then the balance of it, which takes us up to about 213 million, is long-term. Our exposure to interest rate changes is therefore in relation to that short-term borrowing, and we've been looking at that with our Treasury Management advisors, and taking into consideration the fact that the Council's ability to be able to manage risk has dwindled because we don't have the reserves to enable us to manage shocks. And so it looks very likely that in the near future, we will be moving some of that short-term debt into longer-term commitments on the basis that removes the uncertainty and insulates us from the risk of rates moving. So that's the position at the moment. There will be a Treasury Management Strategy report which accompanies, I think it accompanies the budget. Yeah, so that will set out more detail about the situation.
Have you got an idea to say would deliver?
Well, it's very difficult to say whether it will deliver any savings or not. With short-term borrowing, we have been able to access rates that are relatively low because it's simply the case that those rates tend to be a bit lower than the long-term rates. However, that exposes us to the risk that they shift. So in fact, what we'll be doing is we'll be trading the opportunity of benefiting from those short-term rates for the certainty of being in those long-term rates, but knowing that we haven't got any shocks coming in our direction because we're locked in. So I can't say at this point exactly what the figures are going to be or whether that's going to represent a saving for us or not. I suspect it will be slightly more expensive for us to go into these long-term loans, but it may not be more expensive if interest rates go up in the short term.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. So looking through these numbers and the plan for the increased council tax, we're still set to have a reserves of around 10 million for the next 2 years, potentially with running a planned deficit next year with the hope to aim not even to come back to this year, 2 years from now. And in the budget, there appears to be £5 million of savings for this year, or about 5% of the service-based budget, which has been admitted has been hard to meet, and I'm not sure if that 5 million is what we are on track to meet, or is that the initial figures that we are struggling to meet? And from that, I've just got concerns that the Newton savings are put down to 9 million next year, which is about the number of how much our reserves are expected to be set at if we meet that. It seems we're very much at a teetering point of if we don't meet those savings, even with the council tax raises, we're still going to run out. And that's assuming that the numbers are all correct and aren't going to get worse via the audit accounts, which unfortunately the trend has been in that way in the past. So is that, effectively, is your opinion, is it going to fix things? Like, are these assumptions and budgets, do you think we're going to meet them so that 2 years from now we'll be on track for this good trend as opposed to just flailing a year from now?
So in assessing whether the reserves are adequate and whether the assumptions that we've put into the budget are sufficiently robust, I have to take a view, and I'm currently working through all of the facts to reach that view, and that will go into my Section 25 report, which will be part of the budget report. Normally, a local authority would expect to have somewhere in the region of 5% of its net revenue budget. Well, its reserves would be equivalent to a sum that was 5% of its net revenue budget. So we're in that territory. So the real question is, are there any exceptional reasons why we might need more than that? And that really involves me looking at all the risks that we're facing as an organisation and trying to understand what kind of level of reserves we would need so that we had assurance that we can still get through the year and remain within our resource boundaries even if a lot of them actually happened, a lot of those risks actually happened, and we were faced with a worst case scenario. So that's the piece of work that I'm doing. So I can't give you an answer right now. It will have to be part of my Section 25 report. But I mean, I think this is the right territory for us to be discussing that. These are the issues that we have to consider, and the future stability and robustness of the organisation, and the extent to which we're dependent upon government help in future, all rests on the question of how robust are our estimates, and have we got the right level of reserves? So it is a very important question.
In a completely different track from your initial statement, you mentioned how we're on an extremely tight timelines for this budget, expected 5th of March to try and pass it, and 10th March is what we've got to aim for council tax bills to be printed without. Do we have contingencies in place? Because we're reliant on the national government, and we won't be able to pass this without the effectively agreement. So, yeah, what contingencies do we have in place if they do reach right towards the end of that timeline? If they are late, if we do have to move things and we can't meet that timeline, what happens? Like,
yeah, we've done a piece of work on this to work out exactly what will happen depending upon the day in which the announcement is made. So in some cases, it will mean that we cannot publish the papers on time, but the best thing to do is to publish the papers late and keep the date the same. In other cases, it is better to move the date of the council tax setting meeting. The very last day on which we can hold that before we come up against the statutory deadline is the 10th. The statutory deadline is the 11th. So councillors have an obligation to set a budget by then. MHCRG is well aware of that statutory deadline, and we have asked several times about the timetable and when we will get the information. They're not willing to be pinned down for the obvious reasons that it depends upon the parliamentary schedule and what other things are happening at the time and so on. But we're reasonably confident that we will get the decision about council tax in about mid-February. So once we have that, then we can deduce what the likely outcome is going to be of the capitalisation decision. And we'll just get confirmation of that late. So I think that means that we probably will be able to produce the papers, and they may be a little late going out, but I think we'll be able to stick to the timetable. If we were to miss the 11th of March deadline, then the upshot of that is that there are some practical issues which relate to the council tax bills and our collection processes for the year. So it would have a detrimental impact upon our council tax cash flow. But I think it's unlikely that we'd be told off by MHCLG for breaching our statutory deadline if they were the cause of it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Price.
It's quite short. I'm really conscious that I want to make sure we don't, what's the phrase? Can't see the wood for the trees. So I want to just confirm my understanding on page 34, Appendix A, medium-term financial plan, and the one that has the council tax being over the cap. So simply taking the headline figures here, it's saying we have an income coming in of 140 million and we have expenses of 157. So we're adrift by 17 million. However, it says we're starting off with a negative figure of 44. So if I add the 44 to the 17, that then gives me the 60 million odd that we're saying we need to borrow. So that's the headline, which I've grasped. However, from what has been teased out so far, that 44 negative that we're starting with has still got to be looked at some more. And it sounds like it's likely that that's actually going to be higher than 44 from what you said. Is that it?
So the part of it is nailed down now, part of it is still variable. So the part of it that's nailed down is the 23-24 outturn, which so we publish our accounts. What's also in that is obviously our estimated 24-25 outturn, and obviously we're only partway through the year. So that indeed, that could change, and we will obviously reflect our latest estimates in the final budget paper of what that, so yeah, it will, I think it will change. Yeah, we'll update it in the next few weeks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, yes. First of all, the written questions that I put in, I'm really not happy with the answers to them. They're extremely vague. So I'm going to go through them each again and see if we can get a proper answer to each of those questions, because I think it's really important this is brought out in detail. So if I may, I'll just...
Well, just before you go into it, I'm happy for that, that's fine. But having looked at those questions, they cover some of the bits we're going to go into in terms of the place questions or questions on adult services and stuff. So are you okay to tease out the ones that are about budget approach and...
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to do that. Just bear with me. So I think the key one is the way the budget has been structured and our approach to paying back the debt that we've got accumulating, because what I asked was detailed by fiscal year of the council's plan to pay back the debt which it has accumulated. And the answer that comes back is that there's no prospect of us significantly paying back debt in the short term. And then it goes on to say you've prepared some sort of a briefing note which isn't attached to this document. So I'm not sure where that briefing note is, and I'd like to see that and make that apparent to members so we can see that. But it's obvious from this that the key problem that we've got is that there is no way that that this administration has done to pay back the debt that it has. And debt has increased in the last 18 months by something in the region of £25 million. So this administration has increased the debt of the council, and still there is no way of paying back. And yet, actually, if they'd taken on some of the actions that the Conservative administration had put in place, such as developing the golf course, there would be...
Councillor Sharp, can I just I was willing to let that go. Everyone up until this moment in time has been quite disciplined, although I think sometimes we've skirted near the border of talking about policy decisions, administrative decisions. It's all right if I just finish what I'm saying. I'm very happy for you to ask a question about the debt, although I do think we've kind of covered that in Councillor Singh's question about the long-term debt versus the short-term debt. And I think Ian's, the document, I might be wrong, but the document I think that's been referring to is the document you said that will come out looking that you're preparing. Is that part of the section, or is there another document?
Treasury management strategy.
That's right, yeah.
Which will come out at the same meeting as the budget report.
So I would advise on this,
please feel free to ask questions about how the debt's been approached, but conversations about administration's policy decisions, that's for full council, and that's not for here.
Because it's all about how the budget has been constructed and the underlying assumptions within the budget and the actions that have been taken to develop the budget. So the important thing is that I want to really understand what the plan is and how, even with an increase in council tax, this debt is going to be paid back, because at the moment, I'm not seeing anything which outlines a plan to pay back the debt. And I think it's really important that our residents see that the administration does have a plan for that, because we want to know when the council is going to be back in sound condition again. So that's the first one. I've got 8, but let's have that one first, please. Thank you.
Well, I would say that the 8 aren't all about the budget approach, are they? There's some of those that are about specific areas of the budget, which we'll come back to, and you're more than welcome to bring those questions.
Let's just do the budget one first.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, I mean, I think we've touched on the debt repayment, but Ian, I don't know if you want to add anything to what we've already said so far.
So under SIPFA's prudential code, the council is required to set aside sums to repay borrowing, and this is known as the minimum revenue provision. You might have heard it referred to as MRP. So this is a charge that is made to revenue, and that charge is the repayment instalment of the principal sum of the borrowing that's been undertaken. So it's largely defined by regulation. It's aiming at ensuring that the council doesn't have assets that are fully depreciated or time expired that haven't been fully paid for. So there is an arrangement in place to pay off the debt, which is aligned to the life of the assets. However, we have to bear in mind that once those assets are expired, we will have to replace them probably for the operations of the council. And that is why the council has a rolling capital programme. So once an asset is no longer viable, we will go out to the market and look to replace it. That applies to things like vehicles and plants and machinery and so on. So, you know, ultimately we're in a situation where the council is always going to have quite a large amount of debt because it needs a number of capital items in order to deliver its services. Having said that, if it reduces its capital requirements over time, the size of its capital program, because its operations have shrunk, for example, then the level of debt will over time go down in real terms.
Yeah, so to add to that, I mean, although our debt isn't in line with some of those other councils that are really significantly in debt and have kind of tipped over the edge, we don't have a large stock of commercial assets that we can sell. So over the course of the last 10 years or so, in moving to a debt position of over 200 million, it's not as if we have a stock of large assets that we can sell off to pay down that debt. That's the first point. So that debt has been accumulated, not through the acquisition of assets that we can easily sell. We are doing a number of things to respond to that in answer to your question about what the plan is. So firstly, it's bearing down on making sure that our capital program is kind of right-sized and is prioritised, and that has been a huge piece of work in getting to this draft budget position where we've put forward a capital program for next year, which doesn't include any additional borrowing. So we're reducing our capital commitments. And also a key theme of the financial improvement plan that full council signed off in October was a theme around maximising the value from our assets, and that picks up driving value from the assets we retain, but also a pipeline of asset sales, and also making sure that some of those big regen schemes that we've got in the borough linked to the local plan come forward. So, you know, that we've already started that process with putting Reform Road up for sale in Maidenhead, and there will be more proposals coming forward over the course of this year, which will go to Cabinet in the usual way. And as you also, you know, that there are decisions coming on some of those major regen schemes over the next few weeks to Planning Committee. So there is the basis of a plan there. We've borne down on the capital programme, and we have started to put forward for sale those assets to generate a receipt to start to erode that debt that we've accumulated.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Sharp, anything else from your questions about budget approach or finance approach?
Yes, sorry, I was going to first of all come back on on what the response that I've had, because my concern is that this what has happened in the council over the last several months, last 18 months or so, is that the value of our assets has effectively been talked down by the council by saying to the market, we're in financial distress, we're in trouble, we haven't got any money. Oh, and by the way, we're going to sell some assets. What that automatically does to the marketplace is says fire sale, and they will dispose of those assets at whatever price we offer them. So I'd like to understand really how you are going to maximise the value of those assets in the conditions that have been created by over the last 18 months or so.
Stephen, did you want to?
Well, what we're specifically trying to avoid is a fire sale, and that you know, that is a colloquial term, but you could apply that to some of those councils that have got into a position where they've issued a 114 notice and the commissioners have come in, and the priority is to relinquish assets as quickly as possible. And I think in those scenarios, there's likely to be a market response. We are trying to avoid that, and I think that's why we're doing it in a managed way, and we're trying to keep control of decisions locally. And I think certainly from Reform Road, we have, you know, we are looking to achieve the receipt that the market thinks that site is worth, and I think we're on course to do that. So I don't think there is any evidence at the moment of what you're saying being the reality. We have to be honest about our financial position. We need to be transparent about that, but we need to actually make sure that we get what those assets are worth. So I don't think there's any evidence that that's happening at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Hunt.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise I was next. I thought there was somebody else before me. Yes, there's just a few things that I wanted to put by you. The difference between the 5%, the 2.99 and the 25% council tax is 18.5 million. Now, if we do happen to get the EFS, is it possible, because I know our residents are really, really hurt by this, is it possible we could just then use this EFS to counterbalance the amount of just 10% and use 10% the following year and then 5%? Could we not do it incrementally? As it's just 18 and, well, I know just 18.5 million difference, but in the scheme of things.
Someone want to answer?
It's quite possible that the government will have a view about how much it would be willing to accept us going over the cap by in any case. So it could be any figure that they might settle upon. However, what we don't get through a council tax increase over the cap, we'll have to make up for with capitalisation. So the ideal scenario for us from a point of view of how much it will cost in terms of direct costs to the council is that we would get agreement to the full council tax increase that we've asked for, because otherwise we will have to go out and borrow more money, and then we've got the cost of that borrowing to pay for going forward. So it is possible that we could get a council tax increase, let's say, of 10% over the cap, but we have no guarantee at this point from the government beyond a 1-year agreement. So that would still leave us with a structural deficit in the budget, and we wouldn't at that point know what the government's going to do in year 2 of our medium-term financial plan. And there is a spending review which is going to happen during the course of this year, which will influence the outcome of that. We have no idea at this point and no way of knowing what that spending review will say. So it would leave us in limbo in terms of our long-term financial future, but that may be a scenario that we'll have to live with, and we'll see what the spending review brings.
And Councillor Hand, did you have another question as well?
On that, because that really hasn't clarified very much for me. The first year we're going to be borrowing 76.8 or 8 million pounds. That's what it's got here in the figures. So if we have just the 5% increase, that 76 can be carried over. So the following year, we'll still accumulate because we're going to be charging 10% and then 10% the following year. So we will be accumulating income, extra income from that. I haven't got my head around figures, but that's the way I see it. I'm trying to think of what is possible for our residents to make this more acceptable for them.
Sorry, so the 76 million really is just required to balance the books. It's not income. That's just to offset the historical issues we've got, the current year's overspend, and to balance the budget gap in 25-26. So it's not income we carry forward. It is in effect additional borrowing we take out to fund our expenditure. So it doesn't accumulate, so to speak, if that makes sense.
So does that mean, Mr. Chairman, that we're 76 million in debt, really?
Yeah, so from the earlier point
Okay, thank you.
that Councillor Teasey was making earlier on about the starting position is the 44 million, 30 of which is the historical, and then the rest is the overspend in.
That's 40 million.
Yeah, and then the gap between expenditure and revenue in year, right? Is that, which is what Councillor Price said earlier on, was the 16 odd million gap between expenditure and revenue.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Teasey.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Look, we're here to try and scrutinise, aren't we? And it is good that we get different approaches and different views on this. But I just have to laugh almost at the contradiction in the last two contributions that we've just had. One said, how are we going to pay back the debt? Okay, maybe there's a misunderstanding between debt and deficit. Maybe there's a misunderstanding of the financial situation we're in. But the next question was, why can't we borrow more money? Essentially, why can't we borrow more money? Well, which is it? I mean, I just, the conservative denial and grandstanding I mean, it's interesting, we started here by the officers confirming what has been said many, many times before. Then we were told essentially that, look, you know, we asked, what more can we do? What more can we do? And essentially, is there any big item that we're missing, anything we can save? And we were told, well, actually, if anything, that there are areas in corporate which we possibly have cut. I think you made the comment, Chair, that once you've trimmed the fat, you've hit the bone. And it seems we've hit the bone. And we still get, it really upsets me that we still get this conservative denial and
Councillor
grandstanding.
T, just
I just, I
well,
would
just
love-
hold on. I'm on it. If we can use a football analogy, there was a yellow card a minute ago. I think we're in a similar situation here.
Okay.
So let's stick to scrutinising the budget. I understand frustrations. There is a meeting, and I'm sure in the full council, there will be lots of debate about the who, whys and wherefores. But in terms of scrutinising this budget, let's stick to that in terms of the technicalities, please.
Yeah, it's just, that's actually wonderful. I suppose my only question really is in terms of the treasury management strategy, just to confirm, we will get that. I just missed when we will get that. Will it be with the councils? Will it be the next cabinet, or have I missed it at some other point? But I would love genuine scrutiny here, not grandstanding. And I realise the irony of what I've just said.
It's Councillor Hunt.
And if that's going to be said publicly, I will question why Councillor Tees.
Councillor Hunt, please. This will descend. Councillor Hunt, please. Councillor Hunt, please. Stop. I've asked him to stop. I've asked Councillor Sharp to stop. I'm asking you to stop as well. We are here to scrutinise the budget. Yep, thank you. Brilliant, great. So can we just have confirmation on when the Treasury Management paper, was it with Cabinet or is it full council or both?
It's definitely going to full council. I need to just check whether it's going to go to cabinet as well, but I think it will be part of the budget report. So in that case, it's likely it'll go to cabinet, but I will have to come back to you on that. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Shaw, you were on the list and Mark accidentally knocked you off. Don't take it personally. This is your moment.
No worries. I was just coming to a point, Council said, of trying to increase council tax 10% year on year over instead of 25% all in one. But that would delay the effect of effectively 25% in 1 year would put us on the same position. Well, and with the plan over the 4 years is the effect of 4 years of 10% rises year on year. So we need 4 exceptional circumstances to raise council tax with the enhanced debt at each stage. So that's part of the reason for the 25% up.
Okay, so that is the first section of the budget. But I hope, looking at the time as we get to 29, that's the kind of meaty stuff in terms of budget approach and stuff. Now we've got an opportunity to go into some of the assumptions that are made in specific areas of expenditure. We've got the lead officer, senior officer for those areas with us. So I expect a bit more contribution from them. We will start, and I think we've still got Andrew. Yes, we do. We will start with place. So has anyone got any questions around some of the assumptions and approaches and conclusions? Any technical questions about any items in the budget on the place directorate? Councillor Howard.
I noticed that we were looking at car park usage as going down, and whilst I understand some of the logic behind that, I would like to understand how we are checking this, because on an instance recently, I went into the car park, parked and realised that I was one of only 5 of the 18 cars on my row which had a ticket or even had a pass on it. There seems to be a lack of enforcement, and I am wondering whether we're cross-referencing what we believe is used with some sort of automatic counting of cars going in into car parks, you know, like the little rubber lines across the road. It does seem to not necessarily add up to be quite a starker picture when I drive around the car parks on a Friday or Thursday or whenever, as possibly we are led to believe. And I'd just like to be confirmed that we are sanity checking some of these with reality as opposed to estimations and beliefs. So my question is, how do we make sure that car park usage figures in the budget are not just the easy number to take, and that really we could increase that revenue by having a far greater form of enforcement on it?
And Andrew, just as part of that as well, just something I noticed as part of parking is obviously the reference to the parking strategy that's been developed, and it kind of struck me that that's quite an important piece of the jigsaw puzzle in here going forward. So if you can touch on where that is in terms of progress and how it's going to be included in the wider budget papers, if we expect to see it prior to the final budget paper, that would be useful as well. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Howard, for the question. So we try and use as many of the systems that are available to us to tell us what parking sort of behaviours are going on out there. So using sources like Ringo is quite key to us. So we have Ringo parking across most of our car parks, and that does provide us with a really useful data source to understand those sort of parking behaviours. We do also do some observation of car parks as well. So we do physically go out and observe and record usage at different points in time. And that's sort of the main, those are the main sources of sort of data sort of capture. And then that's where within sort of, whether it's the budget reports or budget setting papers, we obviously explain current usage levels. So we know at the moment that our usage across the board of car parks is decreasing. Revenues have increased, but the kind of combined impact of less people parking is creating that gap and that pressure that we see within our budgets. So if our parking usage was to steadily increase, then obviously we'd see the parking income gap close and we'd be on track to achieve budget. But unfortunately, we're not at the moment. So the work that's been going on around, I think what we've described as a parking strategy, I'm still not entirely sure if that's the best term that we placed on it some time ago, but really it's sort of a working group with members as well that's identifying and looking through the kind of statistics and the data that's available to help inform the budget setting process into 25-26. So there's been a lot of more granular detailed work going on to look at kind of differential usage of different car parks. Perhaps we need to consider more so differential fees and charges rather than kind of blanket approaches, which is something that we're looking at. We've looked at kind of usage or purchasing behaviours around our permits. So our resident permits, you'll probably know we have a price for a first permit, second and third. So we've looked to try and adjust some of those price points going into next year as well, where we've seen real decrease in residents purchasing those. So yeah, that's basically where we are at the moment. We probably could invest further in terms of counters and other systems, but we have a fairly sort of significant data capture across the piece to understand what the behaviours are, and of course it's about making sure that those stay consistent year on year. So we are comparing like for like. We're not sort of changing anything particular within the methodology that would throw that kind of comparison data out. So that's where we are.
you're saying, but to my mind, the sampling approach that you're taking, possibly, I would love to say that I felt that it seemed rigorous. At this moment, I personally feel that it seems more ad hoc than rigorous. And my own anecdotal thoughts on it is that I feel I would love to know how many enforcement tickets we issue this year versus last year versus the year before. And especially on the larger car parks where we, in a bizarre statement, have people walking potentially up and down multi-storey car parks trying to give out tickets and enforce, where it's a well-known fact that these guys aren't going around there and there is systematic avoidance. I hear it when I'm sitting there waiting to go to the car park, and go to Sainsbury's, is people are just not bothering because they don't believe there's any enforcement. So my point on this is not necessarily to go into the detail, but to encourage there to be a far more rigorous sampling approach and understanding of the volumes of cars going in and out of our car park, so that we can actually make sure that we are collecting the appropriate amount of revenue that our charges are supposed to be giving. At this moment in time, my gut feeling says unconvinced, and I would just like to leave it at that. So said my opinion, so thank you.
Thank you, councillor Howard. Councillor Price.
I've got two. One is questions. One is following on the parking to make sure I've understood. When we set the parking prices and we put them up last year, I think reading this, that we based it on insufficient data to make an informed decision. And it was more, let's go for it and see if it works. And the high price didn't quite work, although we've got more income in. Have we now, from what's just been said, got that data on which we are making an informed decision, or are we still in the realms of we haven't got it all, so it's still a bit of suck your finger and hope for the best? So that's one. My other is, I asked a question which the answer I don't really understand, and my concern was that there are a range of items under place from 02G to 116, which have got budget uplifts. My understanding that is because the figures that were in the year we're currently in were not sufficient, and there wasn't recognised that there wasn't sufficient to deliver the service. So, for example, if I take trees, it's just one example, there is no budget to replace trees. And I just want to make sure that for this budget that we're looking at, all of that now has been sorted. There won't be any other surprise and any other budget uplifts that we have to do next year. Every single area has said, yes, I need this amount. And I didn't have it last year, but I need that. So that's my second question. Thank you.
Lovely. So we'll come to you, Andrew, on that. And just to maybe clarify on that second question, what you're talking about here is in the budget where it refers to historic capital spend that was...
No, not necessarily. It was just, it talks about budget uplifts.
Yeah.
And whereas I think there was no budget.
Right.
So have we gone through now every line? We won't get a surprise in a year's time. Oh, we didn't allow for that.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew, over to you.
So the previous budgets have always been set using the available data. So we haven't previously set budgets without basing it around intelligence and data that we hold. What I think has happened is that having increased fees and charges in parking, which was, well, almost a year ago now, it was February, wasn't it, of last year, I think we really hit that sort of tipping point. So we started to see that in where we were looking at 15% increase, if we'd held the amount of people that were using our car parks, we would have seen the increase in income that we had budgeted for. Unfortunately, we've seen a decrease in usage. It has meant that we've year on year increased revenues, but the number of people have actually decreased that are using our car parks. So we've had to take a really hard look at that over the last few months and sort of realise and give the budget for parking a reality check to say that we're not going to be able to just keep increasing fees and charges and trying to put more money on permits if usage is decreasing. We're going to have to look at it slightly differently. So we are basing the budgets very much on the data that is available to us and that we hold. We use something I didn't mention a minute ago, but we use visitor insights as well, something that our town teams use, and that gives us an insight and some quite interesting data around people's movements in and out of our towns and borough. So that can actually record people that might be walking around towns, which we're seeing a bit more in places like Maidenhead, where people are living locally and they don't necessarily have a car and they're walking in and out of town, as to those people that are actually driving in as well. So that data is certainly relied on and used. And as I say, we've taken a harder look at it over these last few months for 25-26, having seen that gap probably increasing between the budget target and the actual budgets that we're achieving. And unfortunately, that gap hasn't been closing. So we've certainly injected with our growth bids a proposal that will see us close the gap for parking and some other areas as well. So there are some of those what we've described as historical discrepancies and right sizing the budgets. Councillor Price mentioned things like the sort of the trees budget or other, you know, there are different areas that over the last few months we've looked as close as we possibly can. I wouldn't say that there might not be something else that we see as we go forwards, but that's the nature of the continuous work that goes on to ensure that the budgets are sort of right sized and as perfect as they can be. But that's not to say that behaviours or other issues out there may affect budgets as we get into the year. But yeah, there are historical discrepancies. There are previous problems with perhaps we haven't had as much money as we should in our budgets for maintaining our assets and our premises. And obviously without kind of, you know, sufficient budget for your planned preventative maintenance, you're just sort of storing up issues for later on down the line. And at some point those issues come out and bite you. And I think we sort of felt that a bit more recently. So, you know, a big piece of our growth work for the budget this coming year is to put those budgets right for our planned preventative maintenance of assets. And without me going into a number of different things, that's sort of a common theme throughout our place growth is right sizing and correcting the historical discrepancies. The only thing I would add is just to say that some of the contractual inflationary increases, we've looked again harder at that because some of the more slightly more standard approach to inflationary increases to our contracts haven't been sufficient, and in some of our contracted services, actually, inflation's been higher than what we had budgeted for. So again, we've worked hard to get that more accurate for the year ahead. I'll probably leave it at that point, Chair. Thanks.
Any follow-up? No. Okay, Councillor Hunt.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things on place. On CC25, M4 Smart Motorway, which is costing 54,000. We get the grant of 34,000. This is highways. So why are we having to pay 20,000? It's for smart motorway.
Andrew, sorry, are you trying to find that bit of it?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Hunt, could you just tell me the code again for that?
Yes,
just to make sure.
CC25. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down under place.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah. And what? And the question in terms of that, Councillor Hunt, was.
Well, I thought highways. The Royal Borough doesn't have anything to do with highways. Highways pay for Highways England.
Yeah, I think that's a partly government grant to enable us to deliver some highways works that relate to the enhancements to the M4. So it's where the M4 corridor runs through our borough that we have some adjacent responsibility that we've received some government grant there to deliver some work. So it's mostly government grant that's coming through there with a proportion that's unfunded, 20,000.
Sorry, Andrew, what type of works are we paying for on the M4 motorway?
It's related work, so it's not necessarily on the M4. It'll be adjacent works to the M4 that then come into our responsibility for highways, that where you've got the junctions coming off, places like obviously the Windsor flyover.
Okay,
And
thank
other
you.
areas like that.
Another one is CD93.
Yep.
Okay, Ascot High Street upgrade, 57,000.
Mhm.
We're getting a grant for that of 57,000. This is still on, and I believe that residents over in Ascot are very, very concerned about this. So is this going to be looked at and maybe amended?
Well, the Ascot SBD work, the consultation finished at midnight last night. So not almost 24 hours ago, not quite. So the consultation's just finished on the SBD draft. I know we've had a variety of feedback on that. Your colleague sat next to Councillor Sharp's been in touch with me about that as well today. So we're going to look to re-engage with ward councillors and kind of consider the collation of that feedback and then what that means for the next iteration of the SPD, and then the related works that link to that in terms of the high street and sort of the developments that we expect to come forward. So that's where we are with that one. Okay.
And the last one on place is CX46, and this is affordable houses. Can you tell me what group of workers, key workers, this is aimed at? Have you got a group, or is this just open to anybody?
I would have to check that for you, Councillor Hunt, to understand exactly what that relates to. We did have some capital budget that was entitled against that, a previous scheme there, but I'm pretty sure that we look to reallocate that to potentially a property called Schoolhouse, which is vacant and empty at the moment, and we would look to maybe bring that back into use, whether that be as an affordable housing scheme for key workers. I mean, in the broader sense of the sort of term, it would be our public sector key workers, nurses, police, etc., that would fall under that sort of typical category. But we're also considering, I know housing and our property colleagues are talking about temporary accommodation for that scheme as well, which is obviously something we know is a significant pressure for us.
So you could be looking at temporary accommodation.
That would be one of a few perhaps options that we might consider for vacant units that we have available to us. Yes.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Knowles.
Hello, Andrew. Following up on what Councillor Howard said as well, the car parking thing. It's an interesting quandary. If commercial sector has a pay and display car park, they have enforcement on site pretty much all day. And the rest of them, if you look around the area, I think it's Windsor Yards this week, their car park, it's called a gated car park. You get in, you get a ticket, you have to pay, and you can't leave without paying. And that's how the Victoria Street car park used to be years ago when it was first there. And all other council car parks used to be like that. I know the infrastructure is a bit more expensive, but it'd be interesting to cost benefit that and see what the transformation investment there is against this leakage, because you're right, everybody plays enforcement roulette, don't they? There's a urban myth in Windsor that you're safe after 6 o'clock at night and you can park anywhere you like because nobody's out. And I think really having that, you make a saving partially on enforcement in some of these places and you'd have a more closed system. It's just an idea to take forward into transformation. I think it's one of those areas where the investment could pay off very quickly in revenue gained.
Can I just come back on that quickly, Chair?
Yeah, if
Is
you
that
want to,
okay?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just really quick. No, I was going to say thank you to Councillor Knowles for that suggestion. So I think it's a very fair challenge back to me and the service to consider, and I think it's most definitely something we should look at. I remember when Victoria Street did have a working barrier on it before I worked at the Royal Borough, and that seems a more sensible approach for managing usage. Obviously, over time that stopped working and hasn't been put back to use, but we should definitely can consider that moving forwards, and possibly a whole host of other measures in our car parks. I would just say that I don't have the statistics to hand to sort of back what I'm saying, but our enforcement contract with NSL has most definitely been performing better over the last 2 to 3 months. I met with them a few months ago to kind of explain and express my concern about the low level of enforcement income that we were achieving, and they have put some things right, and they are performing much better at the moment, which is good to hear. I know that we can probably go further with enforcement for parking, but it's pleasing for me to hear from the team that has been improving over the last couple of months. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, and I've actually seen the mobile enforcement units twice today in Cotts Green, actually 3 times in Cotts Green. So it's good to see that happening. On the car parking, as long as we don't go back to the infamous purple coins that we used to have in Broadway car park, I'll be happy. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just would advise caution with the parking machines and the meters. I mean, we did spend £750,000 on, but brought the wrong machine 3 times on the hop previously, so we've got to be very careful with that. But it's good. It's a good idea to enforce a bit more. And in my ward, mainly town centre, definitely a little bit of enforcement in the evening. Just a couple of questions. First of all, Andrew, thank you very much we had a pre-meeting, and that's solved a lot of my queries and questions, which was really helpful for us on the place panel. So that was really useful. Just a question on this, one of your officer responses in relation to John West House. I know when we discussed this, it is out at tender at the moment, and I just wanted to, I'm not sure if you can provide a figure how much is going to be cost, or if that's confidential, but I just would like to know the time scale and the time it's going to take, obviously, to do the build and construction and get that as a working asset for us. That's the first question.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Singh, and thanks for attending the recent place meeting last Monday, wasn't it? When we got into the actual finance matters of the meeting, that's really helpful. So the in terms of that scheme, I mean the target end date or kind of completion, practical completion is October of this year. So as we get towards the end of the calendar year, we should have John West House available to us that will support with rough sleeping, but also temporary accommodation. I do, and I think within the budget papers, we do have a capital code for that, which I'm just trying to find if it's coming. It's not coming up for me. I'll have to check the exact budget on John West House, but it is within the budget papers somewhere because I have seen it. I would just need to locate it exactly, but be reassured that that's sort of now. After some delays, if I'm being honest, we did have some delays previously, so just to recognise that. But we have now got a project manager on working on this with the service lead for housing, our assistant director, and targeting an October completion, which will be fantastic to have that facility available to us and using it once again. So that's where we are with that one.
Obviously bringing that into use will obviously save us a bit of money on this temporary accommodation and also support the rough sleepers. So that's really useful. Thank you. The only other thing is just a general thing that I've noticed as I'm looking through the place directorate. I mean, some of these charges, like if I'm looking at say not adhering to licensing conditions and stuff like generally, I think they all refer to, not adhering to licensing conditions. I mean, the increase is like quite heavy. It's like 147%. I know it's from about £100 to 250. Now, some areas you've gone like really hardcore and like thrown the book at them. But then as you look down, there's some areas where there's zero increase. A lot of the areas, you know, car parking, which some areas you've tweaked it, but as you go further down, there's a lot of things that haven't gone up at all. Probably can't find them now. But you can see them right across the directorate. I don't know, season tickets. That's probably a bad example because I know where you haven't increased it there. But if as you look through, there are a lot of zeros there. And the only reason what I wanted to find out is we've heard, so obviously we've got cost pressures and salaries have gone up, and there's other things, you know, got 3%, 2% increase. Why isn't there like an annual increase? Obviously inflation as well. You know, across the board on a lot of those items. Why have we left it zero? So really, in real terms, obviously we're getting less money than we did last year, and obviously we're under more pressure than last year.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a really good question because I recognise there's pages and pages on fees and charges for place. So there's a lot there and a lot of detail, and you have a mixture in the place directorate of fees and charges that we control as the local authority and those that are controlled by statute and central government. And actually there's a number of fees and charges, particularly within the world of licensing and trading standards, that you have to carefully demonstrate that those are just kind of cost recovery against services that we're providing. And people like Greg, who I always turn to for advice on those matters, will, as an annual process, will review fees and charges in licensing and trading standards, work through the formulas, look at areas that we can increase. We can look to increase for whatever reason that might be. Maybe overheads have increased or costs of processing those particular fees have increased, and therefore we can demonstrate a fair and valid cost recovery against them. As I say, some are set by centrally, and we then draw those down and apply them, and others are within kind of a bit more within our gifts. So we look to as much as the market will tolerate and we feel suitable, we'll push those and increase those as much as we can. But as we just picked up with the parking discussion, there will always be sort of tipping points, and I suppose you might describe it as even breaking points where you can only go so far until people's behaviours change and they decide to no longer use those services for whatever reason. And you know, that I suppose that's the fine balance that you're always playing. You're always trying to look to neighbouring boroughs to consider sort of benchmarking and look at what other authorities are charging for those services, and the teams and services across all of those areas will look at that and use that evidence when taking those decisions. But yeah, there is a real mixed bag across place, as I say, for different reasons. There's different increases, or in some cases no increase, where you might see a zero in that instance. Thanks.
Really helpful. Just a suggestion as well is like in future, is it possible that you can mark them, the ones which are statutory, the ones which we can't amend, maybe like an asterisk or something down the bottom, so we know actually, we can't budge that one. Is that
yeah, I think it's on some of ours, you do see bracketed information if it's statute and things like that, but I think probably we could be clearer with that going forwards, just to help people's sanity when they're looking through the different lines as to what the difference is between the different fees and charges. Yeah, we'll take that away.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that could be a general kind of approach to fees and charges, because I remember a similar conversation last year about which one's going up, why, and cost recovery. Councillor Howard, I know I've got you next on the list, but I'm just thinking, Well, if it's okay with you, can I come back? Because I just want to give some new, but we will come back to you. Don't take yourself off that list. Oh, okay, that's fine. Councillor Sharp, let's move to you.
Great, thank you. This is just a very brief follow-up on the parking that Mark was talking about earlier on. And if we've got a situation where our revenue is falling as we put prices up, surely the market to address is the local people, and we've got a scheme in the borough with our Advantage cards, and isn't there an opportunity there to use Advantage cards to encourage local people back into the town centres, whether it's Windsor or Maidenhead, and give local people some benefit with Advantage cards?
Andrew, any points to that? I mean, I guess it's that forms part of the parking strategy as it is currently known.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a fair point. I think that the Advantage card is something over the last sort of few months we've been discussing and looking at in terms of kind of the I suppose the benefit of the Advantage card, I suppose the administration that goes into providing it, and obviously, you know, in turn, ultimately, what benefit it actually gives, or real benefit it gives our residents. In the instance of parking, we've used obviously a sort of an approach through the parking app and Ringo for residents to get discounts or free parking for an hour at a time at identified car parks in the kind of key locations, Windsor, Maidenhead. The Advantage card is something, as I say, is I suppose the line on the Advantage card at the moment would be that it's under review, and we are kind of considering how best to take that forwards. But yeah, if residents do want to park with discounted use, that is available to them through the Ringo scheme that we're operating still at the moment. And there are, as colleagues will know and members will know, there are some free usage of car parks on particular days in the week as well, in places like Maidenhead, where I think Sundays are still available to residents. So yeah, that's where we are with the Advantage card, but it is something that we're looking at.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Councillor Shaw.
Hi, sorry in advance, I probably should have asked this before the meeting, but it's just caught my eye again now. There's two items in the place for proposed capital projects and slippage for Datchet to Hythe End flood improvements. Now, that's all well and good, but I've noticed it's all unfunded. And no, that's one of the ones which there was a proposed partnership funding, and national government have recommended funding from regional flood and coastal committees, utility and infrastructure companies, funding from businesses in the area that benefit from the schemes. If it's unfunded and is from our budget, have those other stakeholders been approached? Like, reading the Environment Agency papers, it seems like DEFRA should be paying for some of it. Is this us paying after their portion, or has it just not been funded or allocated?
Yeah, the initial scheme for this particular one was funded by the Environment Agency. So it's a partnership piece of work that we've been undertaking with the EA to contribute towards a fairly chunky and significant business case for pulling in flood mitigation works across that stretch. That initial work will then lead to a set of options for actual physical schemes and work to take place. At the moment, you've rightly picked out, councillor, that that's unfunded. That's an unfunded element to the capital scheme. We have previously identified potential grant funding for those works, and that will be the intention going into next year. There's some initial work that's been undertaken to date. This is then the sort of the next part of that, which we'll need to take a view on as an authority in terms of injecting further funds into a business case, they inevitably will come back and tell us that we need to do some further works, and we need to present then sort of a plan that will look to deliver much needed works, but will come at a cost. And we will then have to take a view as an authority as to the merits of those works going forward. So as Stephen said earlier on in his comments, we have in place, and as far as possible across the authority, we presented a capital programme into next year that is the majority funded by external grants through one shape or another, which is very good. But there will be some outliers to that we might have to consider capital borrowing to deliver. So that's one that we'll need to take forward.
But so have we approached other suggested funders of these projects, like the utility companies, infrastructure companies, or local businesses, instead of just focusing on council funding?
We haven't, because it's a partnership. It's a partnership with the Environment Agency, where they've contributed a significant chunk of money, and alongside sort of match funding from the authority, of which it's then up to us to determine where that match funding comes. So it is a point I can take back to the team that's responsible for the project, and see if there's any opportunity to perhaps spread the tentacles a bit wider, and see if there's any interest that where we might attract some partner funding towards a scheme like that. It may be possible. I just have to check sort of the terms of the funding, the previous funding, and the agreement with the EA, if that was something that we could consider and take forwards. But I will pick that up with the team. So thank you for your comments.
I'm only raising it because it's in the policy paper published from the Environment Agency in January. So, sorry, last January now. But it seems like it was a partnership between the Environment Agency and funding groups, local council and these local groups. And if we've not approached the local groups, we seem like we're putting all the emphasis on ourselves, which, fair or not, it's not to the suggestion of national government. Thanks.
Thank you. Great point, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Howard, we will come to you now. You've been very patient. So over to you.
I've also remembered what I was going to say, so it's always useful. Just to add to what Gertch said before about the licensing, if we could have for future things an identification of which of those licenses we can change, which ones are free range, which ones which we have to adopt certain government numbers, but also it'd be very nice to know which ones are actually creating any revenue. So in other words, we spend focus on the ones which are actually important. This also sort of is an idea of understanding exactly on the public hall charges as well. It'd be interesting to learn how effective we are at marketing the halls. The revenue by venue might be included, maybe a profit and loss statement, but I'm not seeing that indicative information coming forward to us in the information I've read. So it might be there, but I haven't been able to see it. So we don't quite get an understanding of things which are in our control and how well we are marketing them, or how well we are recovering cost from providing them. Is that something we can do for next time, is have those sort of things put forward to us, please?
Are you okay if I come back on that, Chair?
I actually, sorry, Julian McGowan's going to...
Oh, okay, thanks, Julian. You go ahead.
Feel free to come in after me, Andrew.
I'll top up, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the scale of the fees and charges on there. It would be an absolutely massive task to go through all those and individually go through. I mean, what we could do is provide a bit more detail about what are our main sources of income, and how much, the different areas of fees and charges generate in terms of budget, which should then maybe enable some deeper dives into certain areas. But I think for the budget paper, it would probably be beyond our capacity to go through that fees and charges schedule and add income into every line.
understand it, not necessarily for a budget paper, but when we're actually looking at how effective we are at marketing these things. So for instance, just taking the licensing, we already heard from Andrew that Greg is going through the licenses and identifying which ones are, shall we say, changeable and which ones are statutory, which it would also be useful that if we did that, if he's doing that once, sharing that information means that it populates for everybody and we all get a greater understanding of what's going on. On something like the public hall charges, it would also identify where we've got gaps, where we can market. I know is that there's been a public hall behind the parish in the library in Cookham, which has only actually started to be used in the last year. It has been consistently empty and not used, while we know there's been a dearth of centres to use in the area, but no one's been able to get hold of it up until a year. So it's a good sign that somebody is now using it and paying for it, but it does make you wonder how many other places across the property portfolio of RBWM are also sort of in this limbo that aren't necessarily being pushed out there and driven as sources of income. And if we can't identify where they're being used, how can we know where they're not being used? And therefore, how can we push to get that space used? Each time we do it, we generate income, which means that our residents don't have to contribute an extra 5 or a 10 or whatever it is. And it also makes us look professional in those same people's eyes. But I'll leave it to you as an idea that maybe we need to dig deeper into.
Andrew, did you want to say anything more, or you happy with that?
No, I am happy with that. All I was going to just quickly say, without trying to open up a further conversation, is that it does very much link back to the previous comments. I think that Stephen was picking up around our asset strategy and the work that we're doing with property to take forwards what we do with our estate. So in actual fact, there was some really good work done around 2020 that I've been looking at in the last couple of weeks since the new year has turned, and that already segments and categorizes our kind of commercial income generating assets with our sort of smaller lease type assets and everything in between. And all of that information will be coming together to kind of consider the future use of the assets. So at times we often think about selling assets, or the conversation can be around what assets we need to sell, but often it's also about how we can optimize and use our assets better and more innovatively going forwards as well. So I think the comments that Councillor Howard's just made are really valid. And as Julian says, we wouldn't be able to do that as a broad brush with everything. But when it comes to a business case and plan of options for certain assets, particularly things like the Guildhall, because on one hand, it's very popular and well used, and we generate good income. But on the other hand, it's an aging building that needs a lot of TLC, a lot of expenditure to maintain and to keep running. So there comes a point where you have to decide what is the best use of that going forwards for us as an authority, and you can replicate that for all of the assets that we have responsibility for. So that is work that's underway, and we'll be bringing that forwards over the coming months. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Just keeping an eye on the clock. We're 40 minutes towards my target and still got adults, children's resources, revenue to go. So I'd just make a small plea in the interim for short, sharp questioning. But over to you, Councillor Teasey.
Chair, I have two questions. The first is on the page 37 with the, of 108, on the forecast capital slippage, in particular two items, the two biggest items that are down as unfunded. And I just wondered if you could actually just explain them a little bit more. Just one is about its CX 46 and CX 41. So 46 is providing affordable housing for key workers. And the other one is capital work to the commercial property estate. Just wondered, I mean, just because they're unfunded, they're the two biggest unfunded ones, and about sort of, just wondered, could you just give us a bit of an overview as to what that is and where we are with that?
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Teasy. So I picked out 646. Could I just double check with you what the other code was, just while I'm looking at this?
And the one immediately below it, CX41.
Okay, yeah, got that as well. So the affordable key worker one, which is I think what Councillor Hunt was referring to before, that's a scheme that was within the capital programme previously. That's actually the title, if I'm being honest, perhaps is a little bit misleading there, because it more relates to the schoolhouse property that I described before, being a vacant property, and one that we're considering a business case for in terms of converting that to affordable housing or maybe use of temporary accommodation. Of course, if that's going to be unfunded or funded through council borrowing, we'll have to obviously carefully consider the benefits of us borrowing against a scheme and ensuring a return on that investment is achievable. The one beneath, capital work to commercial property estate, that at the moment we are looking to consolidate some of our budgets down, because we have identified where there's been budgets previously that may be unspent against, that we'll need to consolidate down and take forwards, you know, as a different project. So that one I don't have any further information on. So I would need to check a bit more information on the 641 in terms of what the anticipated spend is against that particular project going forwards. So I can take that one away.
So I think on the first one, yes, that makes sense, and especially. No, thank you for take that one away. So the only other question I have is, it might be an accounting question, I don't know, but I'm intrigued as to why it is that Place has the temporary accommodation in its budget. I mean, I know that we have obviously adults social care, which presumably that's for people already identified, that's already in our care maybe, and we have children specifically as well. I know we have homeless. Is this usual that it goes into a Place or similar directorate?
It depends where that service sits in the council structure. So in RBWM, housing services sit within the Place Directorate. That's why the budget sits in Place. So typically housing will either sit within a Place Directorate or a similar directorate, or it will sit in adult social care. That sits in Place in RBWM.
Okay. I mean, it just is that there's obviously a link. What's where does it, I mean, is it like someone is homeless, so then they have to be housed in temporary accommodation, so that's Place, then, okay, actually this person is eligible for adult social care, then it becomes, it doesn't work like that.
So we have a cross-directorate team that works on cases like that. So most often someone with a homelessness need will also have, you know, a social care need. And so we have teams coming together around those cases to look at their needs. So that's how kind of we deal with that.
Okay, I see. So the housing cost goes to Place, and social care goes to social care. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Teasy. Councillor Hunt.
It's just a quick one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this CX41 commercial investment property enhancements, capital works to commercial property, and CX40 operational estate improvements, capital work to operational estate. What is the operational estate? I can understand the commercial property estate.
Andrew?
Just a question, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it falls really into my response to Councillor Teasey a minute ago, but the operational estate improvements will be more in relation to those locations such as Tinkers Lane, which we have as an operational site that we use as officers. On different occasions, we have it set up as an emergency control centre when we need to stand it up. We also use it obviously as a key location for our contracted services as well. So that's the type of operational estate that would see picked up within that particular budget line, where at the moment we're doing quite a lot of works to the site to just bring the condition of it up to the required standard from a health and safety compliance point of view. So that's what would fit the bill there.
Lovely stuff. I think that's place, Andrew. I think you can relax for a bit now. That's your job done. I think we'll come to adults just to save your necks from craning up looking at that screen for a bit, although Kevin's slightly raised here next to me. So if we can open up the panel discussion to any budget areas within the adult services directorates. Oh, you might be off. Oh, there we go. Councillor Price. We thought you were off the hook for a minute there.
You're not going to get away with it that way. There's a lot of work that's gone into this area and trying to save and transform and everything. But there's one area that I wonder if we've looked at strictly enough, and that's about block bookings. And I was on a training course this week where it's explained that by block booking, say 10 rooms for the whole year in a care home, it's say £500 per person per week, which is a lot of money. And I know that the scrutiny panel looked at this. The numbers seem very high, and I just wondered, is this an opportunity to actually have a higher rate? Because we know it's always going to increase. So if we had 80% of our numbers block booked, would that save us any money?
Thank you, Councillor Price. I think the scrutiny panel did touch on this last week. So at the moment, we have just under half of our residential placements for adult social care on a contracted basis, a block booking, as you describe it. And we do benefit from a significant reduction in the price for those. The flip side is we pay for every bed every week, regardless of whether they're in use, and it works out. It's absolutely our desire. We've just recently added one more contract and we would like to add some more. However, what we've seen with the national and particularly regional trends over the last few years where the prices have risen significantly, we've had some of our local providers end block contract with us, with them taking the risk on those empty beds, because what they can charge in the market condition is significantly higher than it was. So I'm hopeful that we will get back to where we've been before, where actually doing a block contract deal with a council and a public sector body is better for our providers. But until they've got some certainty that the prices they're being paid through the contracts are just as good for them as they can get on the spot market, I think we'll continue to find that hard. What I should say is, I talk about our providers of residential. For our care at home, we have a very strong contract framework where the rate per hour is fixed. It's effectively a block contract. And while we pay a touch more than our neighbours in Slough, we pay significantly less than our neighbours to the west. And we have a vibrant market there. So there's quite a lot of our costs, probably overall about 70–75% off a known fixed cost at the moment for us.
A second question is that in 5.45, and this is to do with children in placements, you've said that you haven't increased the numbers of children going into placement. And I know I read that the cost has gone up because of they're more challenging children that go in placement, so they need extra care. But is it actually realistic at this stage to say the numbers of children will stay the same? I know with the transformation we're looking that over time it'll reduce, but are we at that point where it will stay the same?
If I may, Chair, it's a question for my colleague Lynn, because he's on the call, but the Director of Children's Services, Lynn will be able to have that.
Lynn.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The number of our children in care over the last number of years has stayed very, very static. There's been very little change. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Price. What we have seen is that reprofiling of placements to the more expensive residential end. And that is, yes, some of that is to do with the complexity of the children and young people and the issues that we're dealing with. But the main reason for that reprofiling is because we can't get sufficient numbers of foster carers. That is absolutely the issue. So, and this is a national issue. This is not just an issue for the council in RBWM. We need more foster carers. We want more foster carers, and we want to keep those foster carers. So it's about recruitment and retention. Now, when you can't get those foster placements, what happens is that the children we care for have got to go somewhere. So they will go very often into these more expensive residential provisions. And as you know from conversations we've had previously, Councillor Price, the weekly cost of those residential placements has risen considerably. So, back in 23-24, it was just over 3k a week on average for a residential placement. It's now over 5k a week. So it is about that reprofiling, and that is due to the market conditions, not to do with the fact we've got more children in our care, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Councillor Price?
Supplementary then, I know you've had a campaign of trying to recruit more foster parents, and that you say that the profile of existing foster parents is getting older, so they're likely to say no more, thank you.
That's correct.
Is that if it's so much more expensive in care, obviously, I mean, are you looking at increasing the payment to foster carers, and are you looking to have a different type of campaign to try and recruit more?
Well, we're doing a range of things. There's not one silver bullet that will resolve this. We need to do a number of things. So we have got various campaigns going in the borough. You'll have seen some of those. I know you've done walking around your constituency, raising the profile of foster carers, but we need to think differently about how we're recruiting. Because clearly, the traditional methods aren't necessarily producing the results that we would like to see. So we need to think differently about that. Yes, we have looked at our incentives to be foster carers, and in fact, one of the things that it has gone to council to cabinet is improving those incentives, particularly around council tax. So what we're looking at is supporting foster carers who've got a child in placement to pay for their council tax, because we need to be competitive with the other providers of foster carers out there. And I think that the final thing I'd say is that we are working regionally with colleagues in the Southeast on a regional fostering hub where we are sharing data, we're sharing information, and we are doing regional recruitment for our regional fostering hub. So I think there are a number of different angles that we're taking to trying to improve our recruitment and retention of foster carers. Always ideas are welcome. But as I said earlier on, there's not one silver bullet. I think there's a range of incentives that we need to have in place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any more? We sort of crept into children's services there. Any more on adult for the time being? I've got a couple that just to make you work for that chair. So one of them is, so last year during this process that we went through, and it crept into some of the other meetings, there was a lot of conversation about the inflation assumptions on supply contracts and talk of averages, and then sort of having to explain that. I just wondered whether that experience and the year that we've had has changed any approaches into those estimates that go into assumed inflation costs. Or so I think it's, looking at the summary I've got here, is 2.95 million inflationary increase for adult social care services. Just to sort of see if any approach has changed or any assumptions have altered since last year.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Ian said in his opening remarks a while ago, when we look at inflation in general, it's not the easiest thing to measure. We've got 3 times the inflation in adult social care than we have in the rest of the budget, recognising that the industry is still telling us that the majority of the workforce are low paid, with the national agenda of minimum living wage, national living wage, and the changes to the national insurance coming in. We're expecting that we might see more inflationary pressure. So we've put more in than we did last year. What we also learnt last year, and I have to be really careful what I say in public meetings because I've been answering the question all year since, is that it's really important that we negotiate hard with the market to make sure that every provider that's working for us is working hard for that money. And so the commissioning team in adult social care work hard to negotiate the best prices. What we've learned from last year is putting a process and strategy around that so that everybody is treated the same, not by just offered the same arbitrary amount, but what's your cost of care? Who are you caring for? What are their needs? Have they changed? That's helped us get a better grip on it during this year. And I'm hopeful that we'll take that learned lesson into next year as well. But as Ian said earlier on, we don't know what we don't know yet on inflation. It may well change, but we know there are some pressures, and certainly providers are very active, particularly around the costs coming to them from the change to employers' national insurance.
And I suppose some of the budget monitoring that we've been talking about will help stay on top of that as we go through the year. The only other question I've got, and this is sort of linked to, it's from one of the questions we had from residents and social media, was asking about the cost associated with care at home versus sort of just general social care. I'm sure that detail is in the budget paper. But did you want to just talk a little bit just to that question about what the approach is for care at home costs and how they affect the sort of the wider social care budget?
I could spend quite a long time, so let me try and take out what I think will be useful for residents who might be listening to this. For people who have needs that are assessed as being eligible under the Care Act, and they fall to the council to pay for them, so that's people with assets less than £23,000. If people are being cared at home, the value of their assets does not include their property, which helps us with our ambition for trying to keep people living independently at home for as long as we can. Because if somebody goes into a residential accommodation and they're no longer living in their house, the value of that asset contributes to the assessment of what they pay for. So that's an interesting pressure, because sometimes that encourages people to stay too long at home. But it's a real good, strong base for us to say, actually, how can we help you live independently at home through care at home, through support from our rich group of community partners and community charity groups who help people keep that sense of independence for longer. So what I would encourage people to do is, long before they're thinking about leaving home to go and be looked after 24 hours a day, several years earlier, what can you do to stay independent for longer? What can you do in that exercise class? How can you stay involved with the church or the faith group or the music group, whatever it is you do to keep that social connectivity? Because that helps people stay healthier for longer, which means nobody, the state, us, or them as individuals, need to pay for carers early. And that's the way that we're trying to work as hard as we possibly can. And one of the things you'll see coming through in next year with some of the work that Newton are helping us with is thinking through that really early prevention, which isn't about saying we can do something different from care now that you need care, but how do we help you make better choices earlier that mean you can live for longer in good health, which is good for you and good for our budget.
Lovely, and I guess that links to some of the community programmes that even start before care. Lovely stuff. Councillor Singh.
First question for Kevin. Kevin, just wanted to ask you about the Project Newton. Previously at the committee, we were told, obviously, when they did the sales pitch and everything, that they sort of on average deliver about 10% saving, like 10% saving. That was probably a bit optimistic, given obviously that we are pretty lean, but I understand we've gone through the process. I just want to ask you the question that, will we get some preliminary results before we have the budget from the project?
Thank you, Councillor Singh. So Newton have done this sort of work with, I think they quoted to us 19 other local authorities, and 10% was the lowest success they'd had. As we've already said, in our medium-term financial plan, we've built some placeholders for those. I'm pleased to say we received at the end of the day on Friday last week, the first response of that diagnostic. So I'm confident with the work we're doing with ELT and with the cabinet that by the time we get to the budget report, we should have a firmer view of what those savings look like. But it's too early for me to say any more at the moment.
Fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, panel. If we're ready, then Lynn, you've had a little warm up with Councillor Price's question, so we'll move to Children's Services. If any panel members have any questions about that, Councillor Price.
We have unpaid carers, which some of whom are children. And I don't think I've seen it recognised in the budget. I might have missed it at all, and those unpaid carers can go from, you know, an age of six-year-old can be an unpaid carer up to an 80-year-old can be an unpaid carer. So it straddles both. They're unpaid and they're giving invaluable support, but have we looked at how we can support them? Because if they have to give up, then it turns out to be paid carers, and then we have that financial cost. And in any case, for a 6-year-old to be a carer, they need a lot of support, and you know, it shouldn't be, but it is. So I haven't seen that mentioned in any of the papers. So I'd just like to raise the profile of that cohort.
Lynn?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Price. And you have highlighted a cohort of children, young people that are a priority for us. We had our multi-agency children, young people's partnership only last week, and we were talking about young carers, which is what you're referring to. We work very closely with Family Action, who deliver services for young carers, and our family hubs support a wide range of young carers as well. Some of those are supported through children's social care, but predominantly it's through the family hubs. And in fact, it's probably just worth adding that one of the frameworks that Ofsted is looking at now is how children's services support young carers. And when they came to visit us in October, they said that our support for young carers was good. You know, I don't think we have reached all young carers. You know, I think we work well, and Family Action work well with the young carers we know. But we also know there will be young carers out there who we don't know about and we haven't identified yet. So it's really important that any professional who goes into a house and comes across children who are caring, as you say, you know, they're voluntary carers, they're caring for, you know, a parent or a sibling or a grandparent. We need to know about those young people to make sure they get the help and support that they need. So it's absolutely right. It's not in this budget report because it's what we call business as usual, but we work very closely, as I've said, with Family Action, and we do a lot to support that cohort of children, young people. So I think it's a really important point and a really good question to raise. So thank you, Councillor.
And get to the adult free carers.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that, Councillor.
It's directed at
Yeah, it's a question for Kevin on the adult unpaid carers.
So thank you, Councillor. For adult social care, it's also, you're absolutely right, the vast number of unpaid carers across the country make a significant contribution to the lives of people who need that care. Again, similar to Lynn's observation about children, it's a really important aspect. You don't see it in the papers because we have a well-established set of support services, and in particular, the carers, people who do carers, should, if they're not sure whether they should be carers, come forward and talk to us, and let's do a carers assessment with people to make sure that we're meeting their needs. Because the thing we find most commonly happens is the carer themselves gets to the point where they can't continue for a reason which is for themselves rather than the people they're caring for. Whereas if you do a carers assessment and we understand those, we can provide some help for them to keep them active for longer. So I would actively encourage people to do that. Additionally, we've just completed a first phase of a piece of work funded last year by the government, one ring-fence piece of work to make sure that we're doing more work with our local communities to connect carers in with that activity. And I'm hopeful that will make a significant confidence boost to those who are active out there at the moment. But it's, again, a critical part. And I would encourage people, if they're struggling with their caring, to talk to us as well and make sure we can support them.
Thank you. Councillor Howard.
It's just the point which I think was on the report, which was 5.34, the reprofiling of children into higher cost residential care. I'm just curious, why is this happening? Is it something that's a trend just generally, or has there been a change in legislation? And how is this, what's the scale of this change from a cost angle? I'm sorry, I think that's to Lynn, to be honest, isn't it?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really good question. I think there are two key drivers for this move towards the higher cost placements for children. One, as I said earlier, is about insufficient and reducing foster carer capacity. And that's not just an issue here locally, that is an issue nationally, where we're seeing less people, particularly since the pandemic, wanting to be your traditional foster carer. So that means we've got to think differently about that. And the other issue is the growing complexity of needs that we're dealing with and we're being presented with, particularly around mental health issues for children and young people. And locally, just to give you a little snapshot as to where we are, in 2023-24, we measure placements in weeks, children's placements in weeks. So we funded 1,303 residential placement weeks in 23-24. By 24-25, that had grown to 1,820. So that's what we've forecast for this year, with a budget only set for 1,404. So you can see immediately we've got a 416-week shortfall compared to the budget. Now, we couldn't have predicted this. This has been unprecedented because, historically, we always had in the borough around 16 to 18 children in a residential placement. Because these placements have been reprofiled, because children are having to go into residential rather than into foster placements because they aren't available, we have seen that grow to approximately 35, which is the number we've got at the moment. That this year in particular is unprecedented. And if you add to that what I said slightly earlier, which was, a year, 18 months ago, the average weekly cost of a residential placement was 3,800. This year, it's now grown to 5,285 pounds a week. And the other issue, which I think is important for people to understand, is that we are seeing more really expensive placements. So we currently have 16 children and young people in placements with a weekly cost ranging between 5k and 10k, and that is per week. We have 2 young people over 10k, and the highest we've had is 16k, and that is low compared to what some of my colleagues in other authorities are saying, where they are paying, sometimes 25, 30, 35k a week for a child's placement. This is unprecedented territory nationally. The government have recognised it. What they've said is that they want to put a stop to what they call profiteering in the care market, and these private providers earning vast profits from our vulnerable young people. So I'm coming to ELT this week to talk about the new Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. And there's a section in there which is all about how nationally we can put a stop to some of this profiteering, and that will be about making them disclose information about their profits and their finances, but also giving Ofsted more powers to try and manage some of these arrangements with private providers. So you're right to raise it, because I think we're in a situation where the demand for these placements is outstripping supply. And that means that providers until now have been able to charge what they want, and they have. And they know that if we in RBWM say we're not going to pay that cost for that child, they know, and we know, they'll go down the road to another local authority who will pay that weekly cost for a child. So, we really at the moment are at the mercy of the market. And that's, we're hoping that the government intervention through the bill will help all of us work that through nationally. But from our point of view locally, what we absolutely need to do is to increase the number of foster placements we have for children and young people in the borough. So, if we've got any residents listening who would be willing to come and talk to us about what being a foster carer means in the borough, we'd be very happy to talk to them. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lynn. Very comprehensive. Councillor Hunt.
Yes, thank you. Lynn, on CH 104G, it's about the legal cases that have come forward over the past 12 months. And £287,000 seems, well, depends on how many legal cases, but you say the complexity of them. Did you foresee, and do you foresee for the future, for the budget, the same complexity going forward?
Yeah, thank you. That's another really good question. We have seen, I think you're right, the complexity with some of our children, young people has increased, and that is leading to sometimes very protracted care proceedings that take longer than we would like. We also are still seeing, although it's coming to an end, thankfully, a backlog of cases in the courts because of COVID. So a number of those issues have come together and meant that we have been spending more than we would like on the legal situation. We see that backlog coming to an end, but we don't see that complexity coming to an end. But we have been really, really anxious to understand the financial position around the legal budget. And Kevin talked about Newton coming in to do some work with us. They are looking at children's services, they're looking at adult services, but they're also looking at the legal budget. So once we read through their diagnostic reports, and once we make decisions about how they can potentially help us going forward, we'll be in a better position to answer that question in a bit more detail. But I think it's a really good question to ask, and it's something that we're very much aware of and managing. Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, hi Lynn.
Hi.
Just looking at this, the budget and the growth. I mean, this is big. It's probably the largest area in the council in terms of cost pressure. And I just want to be comfortable we're doing as much as we possibly can to obviously support the children and keep the pressure on the budget limited. Now, you're talking about the price gouging, which is it's good that you're obviously on top of that. There was concern previously that local authorities are competing with each other in terms of placements, and they're effectively pushing the pricing up. I'd just like to hear a little bit about what you're doing in terms of that, working with other local authorities, so we're not competing and effectively bidding for the same spots. The other thing is achieving for children. Your pressure is majority of it's down to placements, but just wanted to see whether you've looked at bringing these services in-house out of Achieving for Children. I know we've lent them money, and I know we're getting interest and all the rest of it, and we joined up with councils, and there was economies of scale previously, but we're in a different place now to when it was originally started. I just wanted to get some feedback on that. And the other thing is about the, you've explained about the regulators. I know that the Prime Minister has requested from a lot of the regulators about to get some support for his growth, big growth bid and growth plan in a positive way. The FCA have responded to the Prime Minister. It's only 4 days ago, and I'm sure the others are sort of in line to respond. And I know you're having an ELT meeting, and just looking at some of the things that the FCA have come back with in terms of sort of scrapping some regulation and things like that, and insurance. It might not be so pertinent to your particular area, probably across other areas within the council. And I just want to see whether these things will be discussed at the ELT meeting, and maybe we'll get some feedback before the next before the budget comes to us, or the next meeting. Just a little notes to see whether we've had some feedback from those regulators, and you've had some input. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So your first question, Councillor, is one that I talked about a little while ago. We are currently competing for placements with other authorities, and that is why the market is the way it is, and that is why costs have been increasing. So you're absolutely right to recognise that particular issue. What I can say we are doing is in the South East, we are part of a government pilot, and that pilot is a regional care cooperative. There are 2 pilots in the country, one in the South East and the other one up in Greater Manchester. And that is looking at all of the children's services in the South East coming together into a regional cooperative, where we are going to be sharing data. We're going to be working together to get a real sense of what the placement need is in the area, and how we can work better together to improve placement sufficiency on a regional footprint. And that, as I say, that's a pilot. So I will be able to feed back to this panel on how that pilot goes. It's still relatively early days, but I think it's the first time we've had on this scale the opportunity to work regionally. So I'm really excited about what that potentially can bring for all of us. I'm very conscious of the fact that we are quite a small player within the South East. We've got a number of quite big authorities there. So I've made sure that I'm part of the steering group, so I can make sure that our interests are served as well as the interests of our children and young people. So hopefully that addresses that issue. The second one was about the Achieving for Children contract, I believe. And there was an extensive piece of work completed on that at the end of 2023. There was a review that took place, and it went to Cabinet, and it was agreed that that contract with Achieving for Children would be renewed for a further 5 years. So we're in that position now. We're still in contract. It's been extended. And if you look at some of the national data that's coming out, what you will see, I'm thinking particularly of Empower, sorry. They have said that as a children's services, we are low cost, relatively low cost and high quality. And so I think with Achieving for Children, RBWM does get a good service. It gets an efficient and effective service. However, I think it's fair to say that we will always want to keep that under review, and we'll continue to do that. But as I've said, the contract was renewed at the end of 2023 for a further 5 years. Thank you. I think was that all the questions?
I think so. Councillor Singh, any follow up on that?
So the last one was about the regulators and the feedback that they're giving back to the government. You'll be obviously looking at that when you have your next ELT meeting, won't you? Because the FCA has just responded back to the government only 4 days ago, and I think everybody has to respond. 11 regulators have to respond by the middle of January. Round about the middle of January, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can take that back to ELT and have that conversation there.
Thank you.
Councillor Price.
On process, can I check that some residents have asked questions? Have they been asked to the relevant?
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that as we've gone through. I will cover it at the end and any sort of loose ends on that, but thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Hunt.
Just a quick one then. Mention here is, it says, an additional 7.693 million is required to meet the cost of placements for a cohort of children the same size and profile as those currently in place. Now you mentioned just earlier that there's 35 children. Is that correct?
In residential placements, yes, councillor.
And some which were 3,500 are now looking at 5,000, and it could be 10,000, a few at 10,000. So if I take middle, say 7,000 each per week, that brings me to £245,000. Is that correct?
That potentially could be an annual cost for a young person to be in a residential placement, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so any more questions on children's services? No? Okay, now the only other area, I guess, of cost is resources, an important part of the budget in terms of the central function of the council. Has anyone got any questions relating to any of the budget lines in resources? So this will be kind of Chief Executive's office, I guess IT services, essentially corporate services. Is that a fair overview of it? So anyone got any questions relating to any of the budget items in that area of the budget? Councillor Price.
Again, a positive. The answer I got back from the assistant director responsible for the council tax collections was really thorough, because I was very concerned, but actually she's allayed my concerns on that. So that's great.
Okay.
Pension contributions, only because I've read on social media, residents are saying pension contributions are 25% of our total income and our council tax. And I would just like here for it to be clarified what it is, because I don't believe it is at all.
Okay, does someone got that figure to hand, Julia?
Yeah, so the amount is in the budget. There's two elements to it. One is the contribution to the previous deficit. That is £4.7 million. That's updated in consultation with the actuaries. They're taking to account our workforce, life expectancy, etc. The other element is in terms of on new people paying into the pension scheme. The council pays 16.6% on costs on salaries. In total, that makes about 3.8 million in terms of roughly budget, excluding the schools, obviously, which are ring fenced. So yeah, our net budget was about 150 million, and if you take a gross budget, it's even higher than that. You're talking more like 300 million. So it's not 25%, I can assure you.
So roughly what percent?
Well, if we take 3.8 million of 150 million, yeah, 4.5%.
Right.
Oh, no, it's less than that. It's
Okay.
We can do maths after.
it's about 2.5%.
2.5. Thank you. And then something different, and I don't know where this sits, but with communities, they've done some work on doing social impact assessment, which they've charged for. And I just wondered, is this a potential revenue generating idea that our officers could do? And I don't know where this sits, and I don't know how it could be explored.
Okay, does anyone want to pick up where that, is that one we might need to take away, perhaps? Yeah, repeat the question, Councillor Price.
Yes, our communities team have produced a social impact assessment for a company that has moved in to Maidenhead, and they charged for it considerably less than a commercial organisation would charge for it. And I just wondered if that's a possible income generation idea, if they have the capacity, that could be looked at. You know, like we were saying, letting out the halls, they're there, but do we actually market them properly? So there could be these income generation ideas, and I'm not sure where that sits for it to be explored.
And I guess that becomes even more important as more and more organisations have to demonstrate their social value and whether we're missing opportunities. So I guess that's one to take away to this, because I don't think there's anyone here from communities that could answer that specifically. So should we take that one, get a response to that? Well, I just sort of think about whether or not it's a revenue opportunity. I guess it would be someone from communities that can speak to that. Thank you, Councillor Price.
Communities, but they're sitting with adults.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. I mean, is that something we can talk to if it sits within? Okay, sorry, Kevin, I jumped the gun there. Do you want to talk to her a bit then? Oh, okay. There we go. We got there. It's getting late, so bear with me. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Price. Councillor Teasey.
Thank you, Chair. Just one small question. In the capital budget, again, in the forecast slippage, there's an item about Berkshire Records Office, works joint funded with the other Berkshire authorities, the archives. I suppose part A is this something I presume that has to be done? And is this, I presume, our share of it? And is there any sort of scope for this not being our share and others taking more of a share, as it were?
It is our share of it, so it's Berkshire-wise, all the Berkshire authorities are contributing to it, and I think all the Section 151 officers weren't very happy about it and have pushed back about, and that happened when Elizabeth was here. So that conversation has been had. Unfortunately, we do need to pay for it, and that this is our share of it. So we're on the hook for it in essence.
Where's this cost come from? I mean, almost what if we all between ourselves said, no, we're not paying for it? Or is that something that has that ship sailed?
I think that ship sailed. I'll actually double check what I'm saying, okay. But I think basically the archive has run out of space, and we've got a responsibility to maintain that archive in Berkshire. So. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just a very quick question. It was about there's a line in the budget about cyber security and ensuring that we're looking at that. And I was concerned that we'd underestimated the cost of that activity. The amount we've got in there looks very, very small for that sort of thing. But if it's only an investigation, it may be minimal for that sort of thing. But I just wondered if we were sure it was right.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. That is for a resource to support with cybersecurity rather than cost of implementing cybersecurity. So we have one person as a security manager at the moment, which would class as a single point of failure. So this is about getting somebody else to work with that individual to shore us up, to a bit like we've been talking about all evening, putting capacity back in. And Ian mentioned it right at the start of the meeting in Central Core in particular. So that is about putting some additional capacity in there for the support of the delivery of cybersecurity.
Okay, presumably somewhere else we've got the cost of implementing these systems and keeping these systems up to date.
Absolutely, that's in the general IT budget and capital budget where appropriate.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shaw.
On page 92, there's a section on local land charges, table search fees that appear to have been reduced in price by 100%. Is that for a reason? Is that expected or usual? I've noticed that charges on quite a few other councils, so I'm just wondering why it seems to have disappeared.
So are you happy for us to take that away and come back to it. Is that okay? Okay, lovely stuff. We'll make sure that's captured. Right, okay. Any more in terms of, so we've gone through all the costs essentially. Now, the other aspect of this is the revenue, and that will, the majority of that's council tax. We've talked about council tax tonight already in the sort of the opening section. Is there any more questions around any of the funding lines, council tax, or I know that we've talked about some external funding, but has anyone got any questions relating to revenue in the first instance? Councillor Price.
It's the revenue where we put in for the poorest residents, they're going to get help. What I want to try and understand is, in that system, is it a cliff edge system, a bit like the winter fuel allowance? You know, if you earn 2p over, you've got nothing at all, or is it a graduated system to help you?
Cool. Louise, is that one for you to talk about?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, you can't see me. I don't know why. Oh, hold on a second. What we've effectively done, Councillor Price, is we've had a look at everybody who is currently receiving council tax reduction, and we've calculated the difference between the 4.99% under cap increase and for the purposes of our test billing, 24.99% increase. And everybody will be placed into a band, 0 to 24.99, 25 to 49.99, etc., etc., etc. And they will receive a one-off compensatory award directly credited to their council tax account as part of their annual billing process. So that when they receive their council tax bill in April, it will have the compensatory one-off financial award credited to their account at that particular time. So some people will actually benefit more from it, because if they're in a band 0 to 24.99, they may only have an increase of £20, but they'll still get the 24.99 credited to their account. We'll do a mop-up exercise to make sure that anybody who comes on to council tax reduction between our annual billing process and the beginning of the financial year gets a similar amount credited to them. And we'll also commit to anybody who comes on to council tax reduction during the financial year receiving an average compensatory award as well, because obviously we wouldn't have anything to compare them to, because they wouldn't have been getting help in the current financial year. We will also commit to promoting our discretionary reduction policy for Section 13A, which currently exists for anybody who is suffering financial hardship who doesn't qualify for council tax reduction, so that we'll automatically compensate those people we know are financially struggling, but we will advertise the discretionary reduction for those who are just about managing but not qualifying for council tax reduction. But we do anticipate the council tax reduction caseload will increase post-April, because obviously the charge will increase, so more people will come into the scope of that scheme. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely stuff. Louise, whilst you're there, I mean, one of the things that I'm concerned about, and you know, full disclosure, this comes from a conversation you and I have had in the past about some of the council tax policies that exist, particularly around vacant properties. In terms of, as you know, with the prospect of a significant increase, the sort of pressure on paying that council tax is likely to increase, and we might find people needing support that isn't in an obvious way. It might not be income support, it might be circumstantial support or discretion. Just help me understand where there are other areas of discretion in the approach to council tax that are that can be influenced by council decisions, but or are other opportunities that we could investigate if we wanted to support residents in other ways other than the sort of £2 million that's been set aside as additional income support?
I think obviously you're referencing a specific conversation around the long-term empty premium that we currently levy. It is also proposed, and it will go to council whenever the council meeting is set in February or March, that we will levy a second home premium. Government have actually introduced some mandatory exceptions to both the existing long-term empty premium and also the new second home premium that's proposed from the 1st of April. So there is the potential, obviously, for members to debate those when they are part of the council papers in March. But they are new, and they are something which would, for example, have helped the particular resident that you and I have been conversing about, because they do introduce new exceptions that we haven't previously had the ability to introduce with regard to the sorts of properties that we've been conversing about.
Lovely, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, okay, thank you, Louise. Thank you for that. Any more questions on the revenue front? So, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the session, a little over my stated ambition, but actually not too bad in the grand scheme of things. In terms of what happens next, we have got, well, Mark's got a job in terms of turning this into a set of minutes. Those will be what's submitted to the cabinet to review, and it'll be on them to go through and hear all the individual concerns that have been raised tonight by councillors and to take those on board. We've got some outstanding queries that we'll follow up, and we'll be meticulous in going through that, making sure that we do follow them up and add them to the packs. Like I said, if there are any loose ends that come up as a result of that, we do have an opportunity on the 5th of February just to, as a very small item, just to cover anything if we need to. In terms of, I was asked a question about questions from residents. I think in the main, we discussed them. They were looking at, I asked a question about adults care at home. That was one specific. There are a few looking at the nature of historical errors. I think there's still a lot of interest in that. What I would say is that I don't think that the detail of that is for this scrutiny panel. We've got audit and risk who've been doing some work on that, and there is an overview available to the public about the breakdown of that. It might not be time-stamped breakdown, but it's certainly a breakdown in the types of errors and the reasons for it. So I'd advise everyone to that's interested in that to look at that on the website. The only other one, and I think it's probably a final question from me on this generally, is there was a question, it was a very specific question about cycle lanes and how it links to travel, but really what it's pointing at is the connectivity between all these budgets. We've talked to them tonight in isolation. There's been the odd time where I think with temporary housing, for instance, we talked about the cross-cutting nature of them. But perhaps from you, Stephen, and maybe in terms of this budgeting process, actually probably fairer to Stephen because you've been around for most of it, all of it. With the budget, how does the ELT make sure that the dependencies and the interactions between all these different items that do bump into each other? What just talk us through the process a little bit about how we make sure that we are, the assumptions that we make and the dependencies that exist are kind of mapped, and we don't fall foul of that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is down to, some of these will just be decisions which are taken locally within service areas or directorates, and directorates have their own directorate senior meetings or their own directorate transformation programs. But where they are kind of cross-cutting pieces of work, that's when the corporate transformation program, which I chair, comes into play, and we have discussions about interdependencies around all of this. So, decision taken in this part of the directorate needs a corresponding decision in somewhere else, where there's usually a corporate service. Or the other thing at the moment is to deliver transformation, or some of the savings is that you need support from program teams or project management teams. So that's where that's discussed, and part of this is that part of the growth is that services have put forward what they need to deliver savings and transformations in many cases. So that's where that is all picked up, and that I think is always, as always, is an evolving process, and something that we kind of continue to lean into, but that's effectively how we do it.
Councillor Price.
Quickly, you mentioned that there is an explanation of the errors, and I just wondered, when Mark does the minutes, could he give the link to the paper and cabinets, so that I know residents are interested in that? Thank
Absolutely,
you.
good point. That kind of concludes the budget. Thank you very much to panel members who have taken the time to read through a very extensive document with lots of lines and detail and come up with, I think, very challenging questions, which is what this is about. And thank you for just about staying on the right side of the neutrality line that we try and tread in this room. I know it's not always easy, so I appreciate that. Also, thank you to officers who have stayed the course of what is a late meeting, and I know there's a lot of work going on at the moment. There was the only other items, the work programme. The work programme has been published. We've got a meeting in February. The only additions I'll just highlight here, and then we'll follow up at the next meeting, is we might include a tiny item on any budget loose ends, as I've said. So we'll give you an update on that if that's the case. The only other thing that's came up in full council was conversations about a decision around the contract on the golf course, and it was highlighted in full council about reviewing that as part of ONS. Just to let people know, I'm having conversations with officers about the best way to approach that. So I hope to have an update on where that will go in the future. But I will drop panel a line, and if it does come up, we'll talk about it on the 5th of February as an item. Okay. Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you.